Yummy. Good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Scrutiny Panel meeting here in the Town Hall in the City of Colchester. Welcome to members of the public in the Visitors Gallery. Good to see you. Welcome to people at home watching. Nice to see you. Members, officers, friends in the room, welcome. There are no practice evacuations planned for this evening, but if an alarm does sound, then please make your way downstairs, the main staircase or the side staircase, out the back of the town hall, and rendezvous in the car park, please. The meeting tonight is being recorded live on the internet so that our grandchildren can watch it in the future, and so that you can also hold us all to account about what we have said. Discreet use of mobile phones tonight is absolutely fine. Please make sure they're turned to silent, otherwise you'll be fined and the money will go to the Mayor's charities, and the fine rate will be determined by myself and the Deputy Chairman. We will have a break tonight at 7:30-ish. I think we probably will have a longer meeting than I'd like tonight by the nature of the substantial items on the agenda, but with that in mind, let's try and keep ourselves concise and on point. I am Councillor Darius Laws and I represent the rural villages north of Colchester, and I'm the chairman tonight. If we could have introductions to those members at the table, starting on the left over there, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End and substituting for Vanessa Moffat.
Councillor Simon Appleton, Highwards Ward.
Lee Scaldis, Old Heath, Hive and Rowhead.
Councillor Jocelyn Law for Highwards Ward.
Councillor Thomas Rowe, Rural North Ward.
Lucy Bredman, Strategic Director and Support to the panel.
Dennis Willets, Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Andrea Luxford-Vaughan, Cabinet Member for Planning, Sustainability and Environment, representing Wivenhoe Ward.
Simon Davison, Sustainability and Climate Change Manager.
Chris Hargrove, Shared Service Director, Finance and Deputy Section 151 Officer.
Robert Dorr, Corporate Fleet and Depot Manager.
Thank you, everyone. Just before we begin the meeting, I do have some sad news that I just want to have noted. Members, if we're able to listen to this, please. At about 1 o'clock today, members of this council received an email to advise that Councillor Roger Mannion passed away yesterday, which is obviously incredibly sad. Our hearts and condolences go to his family and his friends and all those that knew him. He served in this place diligently for the best part of over 3 years, and prior to that he was the chairman of Tiptree Parish Council for a huge number of years. He will be missed. You will note that the flag of this city is at half-mast on this building, and that will be so until his funeral, arrangements of which will be announced by the Mayor's office shortly. In recognition of Councillor Mannion, I would like us please to take a minute's silence, and for those that can and would like to stand, please stand with me for a minute's silence. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, we have no urgent items to report this evening that I'm aware of. Declarations of interest, councillors. I see none. We look to the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of October 2024. Mr. Clark, I think there was one tiny weeny part of it you wanted to comment on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, after producing the minutes and publishing them in this agenda, Mr. Chairman, I noticed that I'd erroneously put down Councillor Parsons as having been present on the panel, where that should actually refer to Councillor Law instead. So I've produced some amended copies for you to sign, and if the panel are happy with that amendment to correct it, I'll go forward with it. Thank you.
Is everyone happy that they're an accurate record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I'll be signing those tonight, the amended ones. Okay. We move on to item 6, which is the general have your say section. This is a fantastic opportunity that we host here in this council to let members of the public come and have their say. I've had pre-notification of 4 speakers. I would like to call first to the table Mr. Alan Short, please, who wishes to speak on Alumno and Middlewick. Mr. Short.
Good evening. At the last panel meeting, the chair offered a meeting in camera to consider the alumno lessons learned. Just wondered what arrangements were going to happen for that to take place. I was also promised a letter for the person responsible for the suppression of Natural England letter received shortly before the full council meeting approved the plan. I got and raised that and the issue of the suppression of the original PBA report that stated that the land wasn't suitable for development as it failed to meet the biodiversity requirements if houses were built. At the Cabinet meeting, I got a reply from Councillor Vaughan. This was discussed at the Cabinet meeting, but it was quite clear from her position that actually she knows nothing about the letter. I was surprised that Councillor Goss also denied seeing either the Natural England letter or the PBA report. You may recall that in the distant past, the Gazette accused Councillor Goss and Councillor Tim Young of suppressing the letter. And when I raised this at the full council meeting, Councillor Goss assured me that Tim Young had had no hand in the suppression of that letter, and he graciously accepted my apology for that accusation. But Mr. Goss never said, you know, if he knew that information, how was he able to declare Tim had no hand in it. So the Natural England was not circulated in full to the council prior to the vote on the adoption of the local plan. Councillor Goss's response at the full council was that he knew nothing of the letter from Natural England, the statutory body for natural environment protection, and though he was chair of the local plan committee and a cabinet member, he had seen neither the letter nor the PBA report. Councillor Corey, who was chairing the cabinet meeting, wondered who had received that. So it'd be interesting to find out who had it, both documents, and what did they know and why weren't they circulated. I feel the scrutiny panel needs to, under its powers, to ask who saw these 2 documents, when and why they weren't circulated to elected councillors in consideration of the draft local plan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Short. Indeed, at the last meeting, I did, as the chairman here, suggest on the advice of Councillor Scordis, actually, that we would have a confidential briefing remotely with a monitoring officer around Alumno. That has not been organised yet. It is going to be organised as a consequence of that private briefing, because we understand, we are being told that there are commercial sensitivities. But as a consequence of that private briefing, we will then be able to have a greater steer and determine when it can come into a public forum. But that's my plan, and I'm here until May at least, so that's going to be happening, and the clerk is making a note of it now. And if the monitoring officer and my diaries haven't aligned just yet, I do apologise, but they're going to, and we'll make sure that everyone has a chance to be there. On Middlewick, we also have other speakers speaking on Middlewick tonight. I just wonder if I maybe, for the purposes of getting us progress, might invite them up to the table now, and then we can then address your comments en masse, unless you'd like me to keep you there, Mr. Short. It's up to you.
I mean, my question is not a one of whether the WIC should be in the local plan or not. It is the issue of the suppression of information that might have resulted in councillors making a different decision. We need to remember that only 26 out of 51 councillors voted in favour of that local plan, and had though that letter and the PBA report been available to them, a different decision might have been taken. And that's my issue. It's not whether the WIC should be in the local plan or not. So I think I'd like to take it now.
You are in luck this evening, because you've got some very, very significant councillors in the room. And I've seen a hand raised by Councillor Goss. I wonder if you want to make a contribution at this stage. Feel free, Mr. Goss, to come to a microphone. Maybe over here would be good. This could be useful intervention, Mr. Short. You've made a good advert for me this evening about the annual churn of councillors and portfolio holders and chairs. I thank you for that, because I do believe that the annual churn, as well as being very expensive, dilutes accountability. Not that I'm saying that what we're about to hear won't be accurate. I'm sure it will be the best of Councillor Goss's recollection of events, but you have made a very good advert this evening for why Colchester really shouldn't do elections by thirds. Thank you very much. Over to Councillor Goss.
It's really to repeat what I said at the last meeting, and I really need to try and convey this message as crisply and clearly as I can, because clearly I didn't do a good enough job at the last meeting, so I'll try and be even more succinct and crisp. You mentioned the Gazette and allegations. The Gazette has not made any allegations about any councillor suppressing the letter. I think you are referring to a letter that you wrote, but the Gazette has not accused any councillor in any article of suppressing any letter or any report. They have not. So that is not correct. I think you made a comment at a previous meeting, obviously everything's recorded and minuted, where you accused Tim and I of suppressing, and I said actually I didn't and Tim didn't. So neither of us have suppressed anything, and I refer you back to the previous recording, which you may wish to listen to again, that a councillor, no councillor, has any power or influence to suppress anything. It is as simple as that. It doesn't happen, and it certainly didn't happen on my watch as chair or vice chair of local plan, which I did for over 10 years. And as I also said at the last meeting, and I think I've said this at several meetings as well, and we can track back, it'll all be logged and recorded, that there's two different things here. There's something the Gazette reported more recently about an early report that did or didn't make it to the council, and no councillor knew about that as far as I'm aware. And there's a separate letter you refer to, which came out after the local plan had been through a public examination, and Councillor Luxford Vaughan went over this in great detail at the last meeting and explained that. And I also explained that the letter you referred to, I actually made reference to in my speech at full council, when I was actually stating to councillors why we should adopt part 2 of the local plan. And again, you can go back and listen to that. So I think we're conflating and confusing several things here, and I just want to state it clearly again on the record for probably about the 4th time now. So I hope that is as clear as I can possibly be.
Thank you, Councillor Goss. You can get a sentence.
It was reported in the Gazette, if I can go back far enough, although I don't have them, at the time, that the letter was in some way not circulated. The letter was received. We know the letter was received. We know the date the letter was received. What we don't know is why it did not appear in front of councillors, because it was very clear. You gave me an answer last time which said that it was of no consequence. The letter says we don't normally report or raise issues on anything other than SSI, but this site is so important that we wish to comment on this, and it ended ended with them saying, reserve the right to oppose any planning application that takes place. Now, you can't get fairer than that, that should have been seen by the council. So, as Mark Corey says, maybe Mark Corey will tell me who received the letter.
Okay. For the purposes of tonight, we're going to draw the line there. It sounds like the conversation could still be active, but we're going to move on. I'm going to invite up Ms. Caroline White, please, who I believe wishes to speak in the generality of Middlewick Ranges. You have 3 minutes. Welcome. Thank you for giving up your time to be here.
I'm on now, aren't I? Yeah. Good evening. Tonight I seek clarity on Middlewick Ranges, particularly concerning the Council's commitment to use the most up-to-date evidence in the local plan review. Councillor Luxford Vaughan emphasised that the Council is committed to protecting our environment and will consider all new evidence, including recent ecological surveys. However, I have concerns about the scope and impartiality of these surveys. How does the Council ensure that the latest evidence genuinely informs the draft plan? Given the limited and development bias scope of the commissioned ecological studies, how is the Council addressing concerns about species like nightingales, which are excluded from the current survey briefs? Why has there been no facilitated meeting between the Friends of Middlewick and the commissioned ecologists, despite promises to integrate data from Friends of Middlewick into the planning process? Furthermore, discrepancies in the ecological data used in the current local plan raise questions about the Council's oversight capabilities. Who was responsible for scrutinising the Stantec report that underreported the actual hectareage of acid grassland, affecting the feasibility of achieving a 10% biodiversity net gain? Questions have been asked and remain unanswered about who the PBA report was shared with. But there is the additional question of how the discrepancies between the data in the local plan and the concept master plan presented by Stantec were not identified and addressed. Has the Scrutiny Panel investigated how such a critical oversight occurred and what steps are being taken to ensure it does not happen again? Moreover, with the UK's international responsibility to protect species-rich grasslands, as advised by the JNC, it's concerning that Sandra Scott could not confirm whether fungi crucial to Middlewick's biodiversity would be included in the upcoming surveys. Will the Scrutiny Panel hold the Planning Department to account if surveys for species of conservation significance are not undertaken and therefore the data for these species is not available for consideration as promised by Councillor Luxford Vaughan? Will experts' names who analysed Friends of Middlewick's data that has been shared be disclosed? How will the committee ensure robust policies and expertise are in place for the consideration of ecological data and the plan's review? I urge the committee to address these gaps in scrutiny and policy to genuinely protect Middlewick's valuable ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White, for your contribution. And I'm sorry if I appear unhelpful, but unless I get kicked under the table and corrected, my understanding is that planning is a quasi-judicial matter and that this committee doesn't have the ability to ask some of the questions that you have asked. However, before we move on to our next contributor, I will give you confidence that if the portfolio holder here this evening would like to address some of what you've said, then we might have an opportunity for that to happen. But I don't have the power, the tools in my armoury to ask some of those questions, just being straight with you. But you've made a very positive contribution. Your comments have been recorded in a public forum. And we've got the portfolio holder here tonight, so you may well get some answers, if that is okay. May I move on? But by all means, come back. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So who would answer those questions? Who actually does hold them to scrutiny? Because, you know, if we look, we have Councillor Luxford Vaughan has actually said that the Stantec report was rubbish. Actually, we have an admission that Middlewick was put on the local plan before any ecological data was considered, and it is a local wildlife site. I mean, how does that happen? I really don't understand how it happens, and it looks like it's happening again. There's a bias brief where many of the taxa are excluded from the surveys within Middlewick. How will they be accounted for? How will actually genuine ecological data be presented to councillors to make an informed decision about the local plan? This is preserving, you know, for future generations. There are extinctions happening, and yet Colchester just seems to be just happy to let it happen.
So the process involves the local plan committee, okay?
Yep.
I don't have the ability to alter the local plan as it is at the moment,
Yes,
or
I
ask
understand
questions
that.
about it. We don't.
Yeah.
Let's, if you don't mind, let's have our other contributor on Middlewick, and I can see that the portfolio holder here is writing down notes of what you're saying, so you might get some answers tonight.
But not a chance to respond.
Let's see.
Right,
Let's
thank
see.
you. Thank
I have had that you had a little response. Can I call up, please, Mr. Martin Pugh, who I believe also wishes to speak about Middlewick. Thank you, Martin. You know the drill here tonight. And while you're getting composed, may I just say, you know, coming to a public meeting and having your say and having that recorded in this place is a very valuable process, okay? Even if I'm not able to come over there and give you the sweeties that you're looking for this evening, it is a useful process, and you're lucky because we have got some people here who might be able to give you some. Here we go then.
Thank you, Chair and Councillors. I want to echo what Alan and Caroline said, but also take it in a slightly different direction and address, following on from what they said, the deeply troubling practices surrounding the allocation of Middlewick Ranges for development. This isn't just one site. It highlights systemic failure in our planning process, where decisions are driven by planner influence and bypassing due process, undermining public trust. I think that's very palpable at the moment. So number one, the decision to allocate Middlewick Ranges for 1,000 homes in 2017, as Caroline said, was made without any ecological surveys. The site was included in the local plan with zero baseline evidence. A clear example of a predetermined outcome. In fact, the well-known councillor at the time said development at Middlewick needs to go ahead without any evidence. Number two, then came the 2020 Stantec report, supposedly a comprehensive follow-up to the 2017 PBA report. But instead of enhancing accuracy, it manipulated data to favour development, downgrading critical habitats and to inflate a misleading BNG score. Even the portfolio holder, as we have heard, said this report is rubbish and not fit for purpose. Yet the council still inexplicably continue to rely on it, saying it's more detailed. Number three, now consider the independent ecologist brief. We were promised a fresh assessment starting from scratch, I quote. It's anything but. It directs the ecologist to find areas for development, skipping over the legal requirement to first avoid harm to irreplaceable habitats. This makes an honest assessment nearly impossible. Even if the ecologists wanted to, they're constrained by the brief. If due process and full application of the mitigation hierarchy aren't followed, the council risks yet again endorsing unviable plans and very expensive consequences as a result of that. Number four, and then the Natural England letter, which whether or not it was deliberately withheld, it certainly wasn't circulated. And it's quite extraordinary tonight to hear, yet again, no accountability, no acceptance of the significance of that. Quite shocking. We've seen this pattern with other developments like Alumno, Abro, etc. Cases revealing planners and select cabinet members bulldozing over procedures and environmental laws. Councillors are sidelined, scrutiny panels are left powerless. But Middlewick takes us to another level with the rare acid grassland of national level value. The reputational damage here will be immense without an urgent change of course. Pursuing development, despite overwhelming scientific and ecological evidence, will tarnish this council's legacy for decades and waste public resources. That's not hyperbole. I think we know how serious this is. You continue to say the plan is sound, violating Nolan principles. And finally, my question, how can councillors make informed decisions when vital evidence is kept from them? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pugh. Well-timed contribution. Okay. Would the portfolio holder like to comment on any of the questions that have been put?
I will do my best, but obviously there's a lot of matter that was covered there. Mr. Short's question was addressed to the scrutiny panel. It's not for me to decide whether you want to examine the process by which we have been working, and I'll be guided by what this committee wants to do with regard to
On that note, I will ensure that the rules are reviewed so that we can find out whether or not it is possible to do that. I don't believe that it is, but I will check. Okay, because the decision of full council to adopt a local plan has been made. I don't know if we've got the ability to go over that again procedurally, but I'm not an expert on procedure, so I will check.
Okay, I'll leave that with you then, Chair. Addressing Caroline White's issues, she asks, will the latest evidence genuinely inform the draft plan? Well, yes. That's why we have agreed to get an external consultant, an independent consultant, to produce new evidence that will override the stuff that Stantec did. And no, it doesn't cover all species. Being realistic, I'm not an ecologist. I'm not an expert in the field, but you know, if it was to cover every single living organism on that site, it would be just been an impossible task to complete, and so extremely expensive. This council would never agree to do it. Just as a general point, ecological reports are commissioned by developers. They're not commissioned by us. We don't have an in-house team. We have people we can rely on at Essex to look at them, but we do not have that in-house expertise, and it's actually very unusual for us to do what we've done on Middlewick. I'll give you an example of a much bigger site, 9,000 houses at the Tendering Culture Braintree borders, not Braintree. Anyway, the other site, 9,000 houses. All that's ever been done on that site is a desktop study, because they don't have access to the land, and when the work was commissioned, it was during COVID, so they couldn't even go on site and have a look from the side of the field. So actually Middlewick is quite exceptional in terms of the amount of evidence that has been produced on it, but we have acknowledged that we would like to look at fresh evidence. We're more than happy to take on board evidence produced by others, and to hand that over to those experts to consider at the same time. Going back to my notes, the opportunity for all to scrutinise this evidence will be at the Reg 19 consultation for the local plan, as it was when Section 2 first was sent to the inspector. He does his own independent consultation where any member of the public or any organisation is allowed to look at the evidence that's been produced and scrutinise it and give their opinion. And then one of the other questions from Caroline was, I can't remember what the question was, but the answer is the Section 2 Government Inspector was responsible for scrutinising the Stantec report, and if you'd sat through that hearing, which I did, he paid it far more attention, I will say, than in subsequent hearings that I've been to, and he was very keen and invited lots of independent other organisations to come along and contradict it at the time. So it has been scrutinised, and he made significant modifications to the plan because of the contributions of others which contradicted that report. So I think it's had fair scrutiny, and the best qualified person to do that is a government inspector. As for Martin's points, you're talking about planning balance or biased. I mean, obviously, any decision about where to put houses is going to have a planning bias, because the only people qualified to make those decisions are, well, they're not decisions, to make those assessments or to present us with options are planners, because none of us are planners. So yes, there is a planning bias that we have to employ planners because we have to deliver against government targets. That's not something that's an option. It's a responsibility that we have to do, and we employ the right people to inform those decisions. I'm not suggesting that you like that option or that explanation, but for me, it is better that we can do it and have those people in-house that we can have daily contact with than, for instance, allowing Essex to decide where development will take place, or worse still, the government. Because they don't have the local knowledge that we have. They will look at a map and go, there's some room there, let's put some houses there. Obviously we're not relying on the Santec report anymore. And for that reason, I don't really acknowledge the accusation that we're skipping over any legal requirement. We are doing exactly what we should be doing, which is suggesting that the evidence that we've been given we don't like, and we want to go and get something independent. And as I've said before, that is above and beyond what we do for virtually every single site in our local plan. You make the accusation that cabinet members are bulldozering over procedures and environmental laws. You don't name any. That's quite a serious accusation, and without any evidence to back it up, I can't really comment on it, and I would suggest you either add detail or retract that comment. In summary, there's been a lot of criticism tonight that we're not following procedure, we're not doing things the way we're supposed to, and yet what you really want to hear is that we've made a decision about Middlewick's inclusion in the local plan review, which would be not following procedure. We have a lot of evidence, and I'll bore you all with it later, that we're going through. There is a timescale. Councillors are very aware of when that evidence will go before the local plan committee, when decisions will be taken as to what will be included and what won't be included in the review. We can't speed that process up because some of it is being done externally, some of it's being done internally, but it takes a long time to get through it. And we cannot make a decision without that evidence. That would be irresponsible and definitely not following procedure.
Thank you, Councillor Luxford-Vaughan. Mr. P, you do have another minute, but I'm going to suggest that is not another set of questions to Councillor Luxford-Vaughan, because I don't really want you to respond, because we need to make progress in tonight's meeting. But if you would like to use this minute to make some more observations, you can use your minute.
Thank you very much. First of all, we have the evidence right now, all we need to make the decision, and the council vote is coming up like a freight train. We need to make a decision very quickly to avoid this horrible Hobson's choice that councillors are voting with Middlewick on the local plan. Back to the inspector. The inspector was never claimed that they're an ecological expert. They were relying solely on ecologists and industry experts. The evidence they were given was false, which means their decision was false. They did invite other organisations to speak. Every single organisation and expert independently said Middlewick was irreplaceable and shouldn't be built on. The inspector ignored that advice. So I don't know what that point doesn't hold water. Couple of questions generally for the scrutiny panel. Shouldn't a plan based on such misleading evidence be discredited and re-evaluated immediately, especially given the potential damage to rare and irreplaceable habitats? And finally, isn't withholding vital ecological reports and warnings from councillors a direct violation of due process and transparency? And how will the council ensure that informed decision making, including respecting the mitigation hierarchy, which still hasn't been addressed, that crucial point, that first stop as an ecologist for 20 years, everyone should ask that question, is this possible? Mitigation hierarchy still hasn't been applied, and your ecologist isn't being allowed to apply the mitigation hierarchy, which is part of MPPF and SIAM guidelines.
I've been generous there, but thank you, Mr. Pugh, for your contribution.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we are going to make progress. Items 7, decisions taken under special urgency provisions, there are none. Item 8, cabinet or portfolio holder decisions called in for review, there are none. Item 9, items requested by members of the panel and other members, none that I'm aware of. Before we move on to the portfolio holder briefing, I just want to double check. Mrs. Matthews, did you want to have your say now, or do you want to have it under the item? Okay, then my apologies for Making progress on the agenda, but then going back to have your say. My fault, but that's okay. You have 3 minutes, and I believe you wish to speak to us about the report on the climate emergency.
I do, but firstly, I'd just like to say I'm very sorry to hear about Councillor Mannion. Good evening. To properly scrutinise the Council's climate emergency, you must evidence what the reduction in global temperatures will be as a result of spending millions of taxpayers' money to reach your net zero goals. You must also define the exact parameters of the climate emergency, or how will anyone know when it's over? Considering neither the IPCC nor the UK government has formally declared a climate emergency, why have you? Who here is qualified to make that judgment? The IPCC Policymakers Report is listed in the Council's references. It is written by politicians who vote on each sentence, which makes it very different from the full report that's written by scientists. Paul Burgess shows this in a video he created for you with the latest AR6 report, which shows there isn't a signature of anthropogenic emissions in extreme weather events. So where is the claimed emergency? Your update report states the Council voted unanimously to declare a climate emergency in 2019, but what about now, with only 20 of those councillors remaining? Those that voted were not given any evidence, they were left to do their own research. How many did? Or like most people, did they rely on the misleading mainstream media? Do any of you know CO2's ability to cause warming is inversely logarithmic, or what an emission height is? Or how much of the infrared spectrum can be absorbed and emitted by CO2 compared to water vapour? Because if you don't understand these basics, how can you possibly make informed decisions? It's a shame the highly qualified experts we had lined up to talk to you tonight weren't allowed. Rather ironic, Council insists CO2 experts travel long distances instead of using Zoom. The offer is still there for you to speak directly with experts who've worked for the IPCC and written peer-reviewed climate papers, because you do need expert advice that hasn't been funded by those who profit from the $4 billion a day net zero industry, or unelected and unaccountable organisations like the UN with agendas that don't serve us. We do need to make decisions that protects the planet and not create worse pollution and destruction, mining rare earth minerals for EVs and renewables, creating millions of tonnes of waste that is too expensive or hard to recycle. The government's NESO report shows net zero will cost every household in the UK thousands per annum in increased bills. Whilst your climate emergency may have been in the best of intentions, the road to hell is paved with those. So you really do need to scrutinise this properly, or we will all be paying a very high price. We'll lose our valuable farmland, our beautiful countryside, our self-sufficiency and our freedom, all because of listening to fear-mongering instead of facts.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Matthew, for your contributions. I have noted what you've said. I'm sure we're going to tackle some of this during the course of this evening at the latter part. And I just want to extend the hand of friendship to you in saying thank you for coming here, because it is your attendance in this building that's led to me buying a diesel car and not cycling guilt-free with my electric bicycle, because frankly I don't know where the lithium comes from, and I've seen some terrible pictures of where it may have come from. So I am wide open to this discussion, and I also note that in the desire to provide us with apparent green energy, the government is crashing ahead with producing pylons made in Germany and China and copper not made in this country to put pylons all over East Anglia, blighting the countryside, ripping up hedgerows, killing birds, frankly crushing the rural tourism economy in East Anglia in the event to do it. So, and that's me from the heart, that's unscripted. I am with you with some of these concerns. I am not an expert either though. And that is why I trade off having my EV bicycle with my diesel car. But tonight, the diesel one, because I want to get home without frostbite, and that's a choice I've made. We will take on board what you've said tonight in the course of the report. And for clarity, you did kindly offer to provide some experts. It was a practicality challenge. We have to consult with every member around here in order to bring external guests in. I have to have a majority in favour of doing that. I wasn't able to get that simply because time ran away from us. It wasn't an attempt by anyone to not allow experts to come here. And it may be the case that as a consequence of tonight, a subsequent meeting happens in this forum in which we do have a bit more time to process who could come in and speak for different aspects around some of the issues that you raise. I'm very open to hearing them. So there's no attempt to quash conversations from my end. Would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you for that. The thing is, you've spent 1.6 million on LED lights and ventilation and an air pump for one building. This council is heading towards bankruptcy. And when you think you don't even have enough money to keep the toilets open in Castle Park. So you must get your officers to put in real terms what the difference in temperature is, because on that building, you've got TBC, so you don't even know. You spent 1.6 million, and yes, 528,000 was a government grant, but where did that money come from? It's still taxpayer money, and you have no idea what you are doing or what difference that is going to make. You need evidence-based decisions, or this is misappropriation of public funds. So you really do need to scrutinise this properly, because it is utterly ridiculous.
Thank you. And I also further heard your point about the fact that when the unanimous vote was taken in full council in July 2019, a considerable number of those councillors are no longer with us because of the churn and the annual elections, which I've previously said that I don't actually agree with, so I've contradicted myself. But the reality is that was 5 years ago, wasn't it? And so it might not be unreasonable to appraise and consider whether or not every single member of the chamber would sign up to that motion today. I have had some conversations, and I don't think that would be a unanimous vote today, but that's a conversation for another time. That's it from me, and that's it from you for the moment. We're going to make some progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Now, we have 3 very substantial items tonight to look at, and not referencing Councillor Oxford-Vaughan as being a substantial individual, but she has a substantial brief, and you are here to tell us all about what you've been up to around planning the environment and sustainability. And I know that you're not a fan of killing people by PowerPoint, which is fine by us, but here you are, your annual opportunity to tell us what you've been up to and how you've made a stamp on your portfolio as a member of the executive.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to take too much time on the climate change and sustainability work, because obviously that is covered in the next item in quite a lot of detail. I'm basically going to give you the headlines. Much of my, do I have an influence? No. I can be a pain and ask for more detail about a lot of it, but very, very little of it there is something to be influential over. So I will go as fast as I can for expediency. So within my portfolio is building control. Everything I know about building control I learned from industry, and nothing to do with working with officers, because they pretty much get on with the job themselves. The latest thing we've been briefed on, and I'm not sure how far this is extended, is senior officers are now working with the North Essex, or working on the North Essex growth plan, which makes me extremely nervous. It's very early days. I've fed into that, but obviously this is something we're being asked to do by government. It's not something we have an option. And obviously, one of my main things would be, without the relevant infrastructure, how on earth can we grow? And obviously, I will bang that drum as loud as I possibly can. Under planning policy, you obviously have the local plan. I don't get briefed, actually, about everything the local plan committee gets briefed on. They have the responsibility for decision making, but obviously I follow their meetings, I read all their agendas. So I'm aware of where we're at in terms of that process, and can answer questions if you want me to. I know that at the moment they're doing some membership workshops on issues and options. And there's a lot of evidence documents that, as they become available, that committee and all councillors will be given sight of. We do discuss Middlewick quite a lot as an individual site, mostly because of requests from either the press or the public for information on it. I won't dwell on that any longer. As part of the local plan committee, again, nothing to do with me, but I'm aware of it, is we've just put an Article 4 directive in Pennsylvania Lane Tiptree, and anyone who's not familiar with what an Article 4 is, it sort of stops certain types of development being able to go ahead. We've also got one in North Station Road. They're quite interesting bits of policy. If you're interested, I suggest you ask an officer who will give you a better brief than I can. And obviously, we've also just adopted the Great Tay neighbourhood plan, and I love neighbourhood plans, and you all know that. Tendering Colchester Braintree Garden. It's not Braintree. I don't call it this. I have a nickname which is not for public consumption. Anyway, the new town. Obviously, the inspector's modifications consultation has now closed. We await the inspector's final report, and we expect it to come to full council, both us and tendering, for formal adoption early next year. Pre-application work carries on with developers. They are about to start a consultation in various different places. If anyone doesn't know when those dates are but would like to attend, I'm happy to give you them the details. Also, on a monthly basis, I go through all the current planning applications. So anything that's a bit tricky, basically, we look at why it's a bit tricky. So I kind of have an overview. I'm still not aware of whether I'm allowed to serve on planning as a committee or not. I assumed I couldn't because I possibly have access to information before others do. I don't really know that I do, but I think I try to keep an overview just to see how many problems we have and how we're solving them, I suppose. The other one which I find fascinating is enforcement and how many court cases are going through and how many of them are successful. They don't raise great deals of cash, but what they should serve is as a deterrent to people deciding they're not going to pay any notice of the planning system. The other thing that I have an overview, but at the moment nothing's really happening, is the city centre master plan. But I do believe that consultants have been commissioned to look at the St Botolph's Quarter sites and East of Queen Street and St Botolph's Painters Yard and Botanical car parks. So some of that work is moving, progressing. Running parallel to that is Team Colchester, that's looking at kind of all the slightly more tricky bits, sites for a bus station, etc. And because of planning protocol, the two are separated. So unfortunately, I really don't know what the left hand is doing, but I know where we're progressing in terms of work carrying forward. Transport, I have an overview of what Essex is up to locally, things like cycle routes, what they're planning, and also walking routes. There's various projects, and it goes on a lot actually, so I won't go through them all, but there's a lot of projects around active travel, which some are DEFRA funded, some aren't, but they basically feed into the philosophy that we need to enable people to be able to use or to be able to have access to active travel. And they include things like secure bike parking, fixing the link, e-cargo, bike loan, car clubs, etc., etc. The list is quite extensive. Then I also sometimes get talked to about recruitment and recruitment issues. As everyone should be aware, finding a decent planning officer is very difficult. We don't have any urgent problems at the moment, but nearly always we're slightly understaffed, and that's a national problem that I don't have a solution to. I've just signed off the Air Quality Action Plan consultation and convinced them to make it really simple and user-friendly and not predetermined answers, and I'm glad to say that that's happened. That will be launched very soon. And there is a section in there, you know, it asks you, do you agree with this project or that project, but there is also a section at the bottom for people to add any further plans or ideas, because I think, you know, if you've got a great idea, I think the team would bite your hand off and try and find some funding for it. So don't be shy on that one. Infrastructure, I've had an update of where we are with the A12. Seems to be going through a lot of tick boxing exercises. I'm slightly nervous, given the current position with government, as to whether that funding is still sound or not, but I've not been told otherwise, so assume it is. Obviously, there's the Norwich to Chilby pylons, which I think, again, a recent decision has said that they're not going to be considering offshore options, which kind of, well, it's just depressing. I don't know a political way of saying that. It's just a pretty depressing decision. But that our officer is now focusing on mitigation measures, and he's done a lot of work in parishes with individuals to look at, you know, that finite granular detail of how this is going to affect people, and look at how we can get compensated for that. But it's not good news, but it still hasn't actually gone to consultation. But the really depressing part of it is it could go through all that whole process, and then the Secretary of State could turn around and just veto the whole thing and do whatever they want to do. So I'm afraid that's not good news. And there endeth.
Thank you very much for that insight. I have a couple of questions just to kick us off, if that's okay, and they are friendly questions, as you'd expect from me. Firstly, around flooding. So I note that there is a call site process underway. I note that there are fields very close to the River Cone that are technically floodplains and serve as that purpose, although I note that in the past, floodplains such as Meander Mews off Cowdrey Avenue have been built on, and this authority did its best to resist that, but an inspector decided that that's where we would build two-storey housing on a floodplain. I just wondered if it's on your radar that we may need a supplementary planning document around building on floodplains, I got it right. Because, for example, you know, we know, don't we, down at the Hive, you've got lots of multi-storey builds. Now, obviously flooding down there is really annoying, but potentially that is not as devastating as low-rise building on flooding, where you have people literally on the ground level more. I just wondered if that was on your radar.
It certainly is, because I live next to a river. I certainly, Wivenhoe, as an example, has a coastal protection belt, which is, it's not just about the views, it's also about the fact that there's a floodplain, and it's a, you know, national classification. I was very keen when I looked at the criteria for the call to sites that there was something about flooding. Now there is, but this is about professional balance. So it might be that it has to tick 5 boxes instead of 3 boxes, or only 1 box in certain areas, and that's something I can't actually advise on. I've been trying to get those answers out of officers, but they are churning their way through all of those call for sites and all of that criteria, and want to present everything in one go. There are certain criteria that basically crossed a site off straight away, and I couldn't tell you what those are either. I don't think it's flood. It might be, but it's certainly something that, you know, we are conscious of, and I suppose, you know, especially because we have development in Wivenhoe that would not have gone ahead under the current MPPF guidelines, and it's, you know, it's a constant problem, because those people find it very, very difficult to get insurance on their houses, and one would think that a developer would be not so greedy as to go, I tell you what, we'll offer you a lifetime insurance deal just so that we can build on something that we know is going to flood up to your windowsill. But that's not something we can control. An STB might be relevant because I know Essex have just issued a map and grant funding, individual grant funding for residents that fall into certain areas. And that's quite an alarming map. You know, the extent of it is far greater than I thought it would be. And obviously they're looking ahead, but you know, if they're actually prepared to put money in their pocket for stuff that's already been built, we certainly should be being much more stringent about where we build in the future.
Okay, thank you. That's satisfactory to me. And the second question is around, I mean, you can tell me what you can, but how agile are we if there's a windfall site? So, for example, we're noting, aren't we, that the car park at North Station Road is being condemned, and that is a huge piece of real estate in some capacity. We have a housing crisis. We are not wanting to continuously grow outward and take away greenfields. We've got a lot of airspace. It's a very sustainable site. What conversations are you aware of that might be interesting around that site? And is there something bigger to be had there, something more strategic beyond just housing, maybe a transport interchange of some sort? I don't know.
Okay, this is where my frustration lies about Team Colchester and the city centre master plan. If it's planning, if it's actually down, then I'm allowed to have a view. If it's about acquiring sites, I'm not. And the reason for that is because obviously if I'm part of the deal that buys something, then I really shouldn't be then assessing it on a planning ground. So you'll have to talk to that fella over there. And he probably won't tell you because it's all secret. But I think in a general sense, we own a lot of land, ECC own a lot of land, and as you say, there are other opportunities. From experience of sites that have become available in the town centre, we are very keen to look at acquiring them because land is everything. Whether we can then actually afford to develop them is a different question. But I would say we have our eyes open to any opportunity.
Well, I'll listen out for the development of Martin Goss Towers in Mile End next to the station. So, moving around the table, do I see any other councillors who wish to speak tonight? I see Councillor Willits.
Chairman, could I go back to these wretched Middlewick documents that we've heard so much about? Is it within your purview or gift to issue a briefing note on these documents, when they were received, who saw them, when? Because this is sort of an open wound which has been going on forever and a day. And it seems to lie within your portfolio as you have sort of administrative oversight of the local plan committee. And if we could put this to bed by knowing when the document was received, who saw it, when they saw it, I think it would save us a lot of time in the future, as well as clarifying the process for everyone, because we, despite what you say about doing things in secret, we do too much in secret, but this is a matter which should actually be open, and we should not have residents coming in with sort of only knowing half the story about what's going on, and I think we should try and clear this up if it is within your gift.
I'm happy to ask officers for that. What I would or will establish with you is I think it's PWP, Peter Brett, no, the other way around, bit dyslexic, Peter Brett Associates document arrived at the council before I was a councillor, and so did the Santec one. So I have gone back, when we were first asked that question, I went back to planning officers and Sandra Scott said, I've not seen it. And I said, well, before I tell everybody that, can you just check that everybody's saying the same thing? She had a very difficult sleepless night and then went and probed everybody and found a copy of it, but it was marked as confidential. So the reason why that wasn't circulated is because an officer cannot circulate a confidential document for an external body. That's the way it is. Now, I've still not seen it. Or I have seen it, but I've seen it because members of the public have posted it on online. I'm happy to go and find out who knew about it, because obviously only isolated, she wasn't part of that team at that time. So some officers must have seen it, because we found the physical evidence of it. As far as councillors is concerned, again, as far as I know, it wasn't circulated to anybody. And when it comes to the Natural England one, again, I'd have to take Martin's word on that, but I can find out from officers who they circulated it to, how it then got further circulated, if it did. I'm sure I've seen it since, but again, I'm pretty sure I've seen it because a member of the public has sent it to me.
Chairman, I take the point that the document, if it is confidential, cannot be circulated. But I think the questions which the scrutiny panel is being asked to assist on, and I'm not sure whether it's in our powers to assist, it's probably more in your powers to assist, is just when it was received, who has seen it since, if there is a record of those things. And we don't want to see the document. Well, some might want to see the document, but I think to serve the purpose, the questions being put to us, and just knowing when it was received, who received it, who subsequently saw it, if we know, would serve a useful purpose from a public relations point of view, as well as being able to sort of ship it immediately off the agenda of the scrutiny panel.
I'm happy to ask.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Good point. Thank you, Chair. Apologies for that. Hopefully an easy one. I noticed you mentioned fixing the link. I remember when that was put in some time back, and I think we got some flags out of it, and I think we got some plaques on the floor and a couple of elephant statues. I don't remember what else we got out of it, and if there's any additional. Effectively, what are we doing with fixing the link? I mean, it's still something that we've got, and what sort of how are we measuring success with it, and what are we trying to do with it, and how are we working with local businesses down there? Because obviously, on that part, the part between the station and the high street, there are a number of businesses that continually complain that the council don't really care about that area and pay less attention than they do the town centre for potentially good reasons. I think there are opportunities down there. Obviously, we have the river across there, and there's obviously opportunities from taking examples from my own ward in Dedham, where we have boats. There's sort of potential opportunities to put additional facilities down there and work with local businesses down there to try to drum up a bit of additional business for them. I understand that you're not going to have all the answers, but it would be nice to just understand that you have these type of things in view and understand a little bit more about what you're trying to do with them. Thank you.
Okay, within the last month, I did the walk with officers. It took an hour and a half. I do not have that time to go through every suggestion that we've made, or every plan that we've had that's failed, or every plan we still have. But I will tell you, firstly, there's a briefing coming up very soon. I think the review of the yellow signs, I wasn't convinced by them at all, but once they've explained to me what they did, I could follow them. But I think there is a disconnect between the elephant and the signs. I just thought, what have they got to do with each other? I've made that point. Obviously, there was at one point a sculpture planned for Albert Roundabout as part of wayfinding that got scrapped because it's too expensive. Don't mention the elephant. And now we have the desert island instead. No, sorry, now we have the planting scheme instead. There is further work around that. There's some signage. We're working with there's a hotel there. We have permission from them because we need to put the signage on their grounds. Another thing this is random, as I'm walking up that road with them, the railings across the bridge are really nice, but they are a disgrace. We wanted to do some work, but we didn't have a great deal of money. Essex said, no, you can't touch it, it's ours. We'll do it, but then they haven't done anything. So we're sort of sitting there thinking, well, can we just give it a quick paint job so it looks half decent? That, as far as I know, is a live discussion. I couldn't give you a date when. Also, as we were walking across that, there were discussions about, how much traffic and what sort of traffic goes through. There's a lot of cyclists and kids during the school runs. And so, whether or not it was feasible to put a cycle lane in there. There's a lot of discussions and a lot of thought going into it. I couldn't necessarily tell you this will happen then. I suggest you go to the briefing and then you'll know probably as much, if not more, than I do. And it's coming up very soon. It clashes with something and I can't make it. But I thought I've done the walk properly. But I mean, simple things like we sat at the cafe, which has, you can actually sit outside. I mean, it's not the greatest location, but it's the only location that you can sit outside. And I was going, it's a real shame that, we've put this planting and it's all gone bad. And there's weeds growing out of the pavement. It must have improved trade. Can't we get the local people, the local shopkeepers, to actually have some pride in it? And at that point, actually there was a dialogue, get a cup of tea, what do you think of that idea? And it was going really well. And then there was just all this rubbish. And it's because the flats above just leave all their rubbish bags outside. And it's like, well, do the wheelie bins solve that problem, or do they make it worse? There's a lot, and the planters, everybody hates the planters, they look terrible, but they are going to be replanted. They are going to be looked after. They're going to have low maintenance plants. So I can see, it's frustrating that it's not boom and it all works, but it's live, it's ongoing, and there are new plans going ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I'm not necessarily complaining. I'm simply saying that I suppose it's been going on for a considerable length of time, and there isn't. It's not that it's not happened immediately. It's just that it's been going on for a considerable length of time, and we still haven't seen any major progress. So that's the only point I want to. I'm not saying it's necessarily your fault. I think it's been going on from way before you as well. So it is what it is. But it's good to see there's some progress, and I'll attempt to make that briefing. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm going to just jump in on that one because there was something that was mentioned there that I don't think you covered, and I know you'll have a view. So I once kayaked from the old swimming pool at Bellevue Road, Colbank Avenue, Colchester near the station. Okay. No, that's okay. That's okay. So this is interesting because there used to be a Lido, an outside swimming pool with a concrete base. Yeah. Now I once kayaked from there to Wivenhoe. I had a pint in the pub and I made my way back. Now you can't do that today because of the collapse of the Middle Mill Weir. The water level has dropped to a dangerous level where now children aren't able to learn watercraft, water sports and all the rest of it. So our blue infrastructure there is letting us down. But there is some school of thought that actually renaturalization is a good thing for certain species, and also it might be that people further up the cone are quite happy that the water flows a bit quicker. I just wondered if you had a view yet, or if you don't, will you take an interest in this? Because I think when a decision needs to be made around how to reinterpret the historic mill site, and potentially a conversation needs to be had, do we rebuild like for like to raise the water level up, or do we do something different, or do we let it be natural?
Okay, I am not going to profess to understand. Like I say, I mean, when my kids were little, I came to the Castle Park, but we do our outdoor stuff outside of the town centre. So I'm not aware of, the impacts, and I'm certainly not well equipped enough to be able to say about, renaturalising. We've had a similar situation in Wivenhoe, which was very marsh, and the fact that it got flooded and the species changed, and actually for some people that was great and for other people it wasn't. It's never as straightforward as, oh, it's much better now, but I'm really happy to have the conversation, but next to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, because that's not me, I'm afraid.
No, that's cool. I just think I'm grateful that you're open-minded and you haven't got a predetermined position on it, because whatever gets done there is going to cost money and it has an implication and then maybe an unintended consequence. But I know at the moment that the river, you can't use it to kayak, and Councillor Rowe was talking about animating that area with boats, etc., like Dedham. At the moment, that ain't the case, but that's good for me. Okay, anyone else? Right. Well, I think we conclude your visit this evening. We commend your work, your knowledge on your brief, the fact that you keep open mind on a variety of issues, and we thank you for your attendance tonight. Thank you very much. If you like. Okay, we're making good progress. And I can see that the leader of the council is here, and he hasn't raised his hand yet. But if at any point he wants to and have his say and get involved, he's most welcome. Thank you for attending and giving up another one of your evenings. All right, we're going to move on now, and contrary to a previous agenda order, we're going to do the fleet item first before we move on to climate emergency. And I believe that Chris, you might want to say something on this one first before we get into it. So you're the man who knows about money, which is a good thing. I'll let you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I thought it was probably worth just sort of introducing this item in the context of the council's capital programme. So I'd just like to sort of say a few words before I hand over to my colleague Robert Doran here, who knows all about the fleet strategy, far more than I ever could. But basically, the council's capital programme, we've been developing that for the last sort of couple of years or so, and members may be aware that through the budget process last year, we actually extended the capital programme to bring it further into line with the medium-term financial forecast, which has a time frame of 5 years, as where the capital programme previously had a time frame of about 3 years typically, with very little in terms of schemes that went beyond that. So we made significant inroads in that process as part of developing the budget for 24-25. However, there still remains more work to be done, and in that context was the fleet strategy. You may recall that there was a capital programme allocation in there that covered, I forget the exact details now, but I think it was 24, 25, 25, 26 and possibly 26, 27. And anyway, what it didn't include was any capital allocations for years 3/4 and certainly years 5. So in effect, in financial terms, what that was saying is that the council wouldn't maintain its existing fleet in financial terms, which is probably not very realistic. So regardless of the change in the waste strategy, the council was always going to replace its vehicles when they reach the end of their useful economic life. So with that in mind, the further development of the programme, capital programme, wider capital programme this year was always going to include an extended 5-year programme for the fleet strategy, and that's what we're presenting here this evening. What it isn't, if you like, is the financial consequences of the new recycling and waste management strategy. What it is, it introduces the vehicle replacement cost, the cost of replacing and maintaining the vehicle fleet under the new strategy. But please be aware that we wanted to do this anyway with the existing strategy. So I thought it important to explain that context, and that is why it was separated from the recycling and waste strategy that recently went to Cabinet, which, just for the record, included revenue savings in there of 728,000. It included all of the revenue costs, including the capital financing costs of the bins, but what it didn't include was the capital financing costs of the fleet replacement, which is what this agenda item is this evening. So,
thank you very much. Deputy Chairman.
I have a question on the financing model that's being presented this evening. Firstly, can I say that I'm a strong supporter of climate action, be it an emergency or just doing whatever we can as and when. But Council has taken decisions which affect this capital programme and are not reflected in the capital programme. The fleet transition strategy, 54 vehicles, which give rise to 25% of our emissions, and we have to be, by declaration of the council, we have to be fleet carbon neutral by 2030. And this particular feature, although it's the main body of the next subject on the agenda, does not seem to have been incorporated in the financial analysis of this particular item. For instance, in 2025-26, we're proposing to buy 24 RCVs, refuse collection vehicles, which will have a life of 7 years, which means that they will not be scrapped until 2032, unless there is some extraordinary financial provision. But that is 2 years beyond the point at which the council has declared there will be no vehicles with waste emission from their pipes. 2026-27, you have a capital item in your table. 12 RCVs, 6 sweepers. They will have a life of 7 years, which takes them up to 2033, 3 years beyond the council's decision that they will no longer be acceptable. And in 2027, 28, 19 tipper trucks, taking them sort of 4 years beyond the point at which the council says we will have no vehicles giving emissions through their exhaust pipe. So there seems to be a bit of a disconnect. Secondly, there will be no residual value for RCVs and those other vehicles if they're diesel powered beyond 2030, because the government will have decreed, and I think the Prime Minister is addressing this very issue as we speak, they will not be permitted on the roads. Yet the financials we're given have an assumption that they will have a 7-year life. And I think we need to go back to this particular, the capital programme, we need to go back to it and provide an alternative, which is the alternative that the government will probably bring about, that these vehicles will all be written off earlier than 7 years, which will have a direct impact on the capital programme. It will certainly have an impact on the capital programme in 29-30 if we're going to have to replace a considerable number of vehicles which we've bought for a 7-year life and whose life will be curtailed by law at the shutters come down on vehicles. So I just wondered whether you could elaborate on how we're going to deal with these issues in the capital programme and the revenue impact of that programme, or is this strategy ignoring the council's view and probably the government's view that these vehicles will not be on the road beyond 2030?
Deputy Chairman, that did stray a little bit into the realms of politics and strategy. And I just wonder, since we are blessed to have the portfolio holder in the room this evening, if he wishes to join us at this very moment just to help Chris out, because I think there was a bit of politics there. Councillor Goss, do you want to talk about the specific point that Councillor Willits has made, that after 2030, Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband might be coming here to take the keys away for those vehicles, because it's a salient point that Councillor Willits makes, and then perhaps if Chris, you, based on the political direction here, you're able to advise on some of the possible opportunities around the modelling to incorporate the fact that the hard end might be 2030. Councillor Goss?
Well, we can't really speak for the government, can we? Because we can only base our financial model and our purchasing and our collection service on what we know today. And although things may change, devolution may happen, we may end up with 3 unitary authorities in Colchester, we may end up with the disappearance of Essex County Council, but I can't comment on that. So you can only scrutinise what's in front of you today, and you can only take decisions based on what we know today. So I'm afraid that's probably about the strongest answer I can give.
I understand. I'm not trying to be difficult here, and I will let others speak, but we do have this hard target allegedly of 2030, and we are making a decision today that implicit on paper says that we'll be running vehicles beyond 2030. So what we're saying here is there is a risk, isn't there? And are you in a position whereby perhaps, Councillor Goss, you might seek some clarity by writing a very, very inquisitive letter to the appropriate government department to model the scenario, because we're not very far away from 2030?
The polite answer is, I think it's part of a bigger conversation, because if you think about it, it would affect every single council service and every single part of the council budget for every council potentially. So I think there are conversations and in effect, I guess I'd call it a work stream going on to look at devolution, and I think that's being led by Mr. Kevin Bentley actually at Essex. So I think really those conversations need to take place at a more national level as this progresses, because in effect this will halve the amount of councils from 700 to 350, but there's no detail or financial modelling to underpin it. So I think we have to deal with the here and now, whether we raise something on the risk register, but again it'll be more of a global risk. It's not just this service, it's, you know, do we build Leisure World, you know, do we there's all sorts of strategic issues for Colchester, and you know, unfortunately my crystal ball is a little hazy for 2030.
Okay, Councillor Willits, and then Chris, if you do want to respond, please do, and I'm sorry for interrupting. I was just trying to give you a bit of political cover there, but Councillor Willits.
Oh, Chairman, I'm quite surprised that the Council's own climate emergency resolution, which says that we will be carbon neutral by the year 2030, if I remember correctly, passed unanimously by Council, is clearly being ignored. I added the government view because clearly one keeps an eye on what other people are doing, but this was a decision by Council. It was a strategic decision by Council, which I thought bound all cabinet and portfolio holders who cannot just take a unilateral view and say we're going to ignore a strategic decision by Council. It is our decision, the Council's decision, that is being ignored, and we have to have a workaround on that. And that needs to be reflected in the financial models that we're producing for capital expenditure over the next 7 years.
The Leader, I see you eager to come and join this conversation. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure eager is necessarily the right term, but I want to just acknowledge a fair point's been made, and it's something that's crossed my mind like others, that the need to track commitments and reconcile them in the way in which we do what we do. You know, well, tonight's one of those opportunities in which we can draw attention to the fact that there may be something for us to look at, and I think that's the easiest way of addressing this. You know, you're taking the paper as a whole later around climate emergency and the way ahead. It'd be entirely appropriate for you to offer some observations to Cabinet, and of course we will look at it. I understand Chris's point, which is entirely appropriate and technical in my view. He's applying the guidance and the structure and the way we do these things. I would, with every respect to the Vice Chair, say we're a long way off judging, as Councillor Goss has said, exactly what the national rule will be around scrappage and reconciliation of huge volumes of vehicles which will be roadworthy against the policy of the time. So I think it's a fair response in the sense of acknowledging that we are still some years away from the nation having a way ahead that government would support, which would, in underwriting terms, be extraordinary in terms of potential financial commitment. So I think you should have to give us some practical grace here in pursuing the business of the day. But I do accept the point, Dennis, that you've made, that need to sort of ensure that we are tracking towards the end point and ensuring as we go that you know, we're being practical about that and reconciling where we can. Last point for me, Chair, devolution for me is not the issue on this. We'll see where we get to. I know where I want to get to, which is I want continuity for this council and others, given our hands are full with all the challenges of the day. Devolution, I don't think will make a material difference to this issue, but it's a fair point made that we've got a lot of change ahead and we should seek the best guidance we can from government. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I just want to reflect on what you've pointed out there around the potential cost implications for all sorts of organisations and this local authority in the lead up to 2030. And in fact, the motion that was passed at full council in July 2019, the final part of that said that we wish to call upon the leader of the council, which wasn't you at the time, Councillor King, obviously, called upon the leader of the council to write to the Minister of State for Energy and Clean Growth requesting that national policy is urgently developed to reflect the seriousness of the current emergency and to release funds to local authorities, encouraging them to take the necessary measures at a local level. Now, I don't know if you could maybe smile or shake your head, but I mean, have you seen evidence that funds have been released at a local level to support this kind of activity? Because I'm not sure I have. And this is from 2019. Anyway, I just thought I'd put that in there. Chris and Rob, we're still eager to hear from yourselves.
I've nothing to add from a financial.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce the paper as we go. So the Scrutiny Panel are invited to pre-scrutinise the Cabinet report set out in Appendix A, presenting a proposed 5-year replacement fleet plan for the whole of the Council's corporate fleet. The purpose of this proposed plan is safeguarding the financial integrity of our operations through diligent and forward-looking fleet replacement and management, with the goal of achieving cost efficiencies, reducing maintenance expenses, and enhancing service reliability across many of our critical services. In light of the global delays in vehicle supply chains, we can extend beyond a year. The plan ensures our services remain uninterrupted. This early planning will help us secure favourable procurement terms and hopefully economies of scale. By maintaining a proactive replacement schedule, we reduce the high costs and risks associated with outdated and unreliable vehicles, and ensures we have consistent, well-maintained fleet, allowing us to unavoid unexpected failures, service disruptions, or regulatory compliance issues that could impact public safety and our reputation. Whilst the plan sets out like-for-like replacements, this plan will work alongside the previously approved fleet strategy, which sets out a framework for transition to low-emission vehicles by 2030. Critically, as part of our mid-term financial forecast, this plan will support more precise financial predictions, enabling the Council to plan responsibly and avoid costly ad hoc vehicle hires or prolonged leases. Thank you.
Okay, members. So we understand why we're here this evening and the distinction between the capital programme and revenue, and we obviously had an opportunity to speak to the officer Rosa in person about this recently. Do we have any questions for Rob and the team, please? Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I know there have been issues with road sweepers breaking down and being out of action fairly frequently. Does this fleet replacement plan, will that help with them staying operational for a bigger percentage of the time?
So currently the portfolio holder for our service, Councillor Goss, has asked us to present him with a strategy for the sweepers. What I can tell you, and we have the data to show this, is we recently procured a truck-mounted sweeper, and our road sweepings have considerably gone up, showing that that is working. The issue with road sweepers is national, through talking through other local authorities and my connections and our contractor who maintains our vehicles. The procurement for parts can be quite difficult. To address this, we currently run 6 road sweepers, 3 200s being the smaller ones and 3 400s. We've recently depleted a 400 and replaced it with the truck-mounted sweeper, which is being out-utilised now, and we do have a second one on order, which is due to be with us in February. The whole point of this is to replace the 3 400 sweepers with the 2 truck-mounted sweepers. in turn, we should see a dramatic increase in the amount of debris being collected within the borough or the city. Apologies.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's good news. I was going to ask whether we did have the smaller road sweepers, which you just said that you do. I've seen them for the side streets, and I've seen them work very well in Bexley, which is sort of Greater London, Kent. Even recently working really well, and the roads there are looking really good. So are you going to continue with the smaller ones for side streets?
The current plan is to replace the 3200s with replica vehicles, update them. What we do have within our GIF now, which before my time, we've got the option to trial, and we are actually currently trialling other small machines with other manufacturers. I can confirm we've actually had one in today on trial from a different company. What we do now is we're going to extensively trial these vehicles. We've also trialed an electric sweeper. But we're putting the onuses in the hands of the operatives who actually run these machines to get a feel for what they can do and feed back to us. And we rely heavily on their opinion, and that makes a big impression on us before we go to procure potentially new ones.
Rob, that's the second time in less than a week that I've heard about this trialling of fleet and electric, and I just want to put on the record that I'm really pleased that we're doing that. That seems to make entire sense given the rate in which technology moves. I just want to be cheeky and jump in there before Councillor Rowe. Members, if we can go for another 10 minutes or so before we break, that would be helpful if we could. Thank you. And I'm being cheeky here, but to try and understand, going back to the conversation about 2030 and what the Prime Minister is probably saying quite some considerable miles away from this room tonight, is there a cost implication of upgrading technical infrastructure to power these potential vehicles that might come down the line? Do we need to be worried about any of that and any lead times to potentially have any electrification up at Shrub End? Is that something that's on your radar?
It has been on my radar, not recently, I will admit. We did do some work in the past where we're looking, and it coincides with a redevelopment project we're doing at Shrub End, which I project manage. We looked at potentially putting some infrastructure in there for the future. And what we determined was, through various conversations with experts, was to run a fleet of our size, we would require a substation to power. If we went EV, we would require a substation. Substation alone, we're looking in the region of £400,000 before we put the cabling in for said chargers for the potential electric RCVs.
Wow. So when you say substation, is that something that UK Power Networks would provide infrastructure-wise? Okay.
Yes.
And they are notoriously an organisation that's got a very long list of infrastructure to install. So even if we had the money, the lead time on that one might be quite interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay, really interesting. Councillor Rowe, sorry to take your time.
Problem, Chair. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. I noticed in the presentation you mentioned the £728,000 savings that we are proposing to make from all of these changes, which obviously the upgrade to the fleet is part of. I'd just like to know from your perspective, how much of that £728,000 will be savings from this fleet upgrade, or is it purely all operational? And if so, effectively, how does that feed? How does the new fleet feed into the £728,000 savings? Just before I let you answer, if you don't mind, I just want to sort of add on to that. I mean, I have spoken with Rosa sort of in relative detail around this, and I genuinely can't understand. I think it was £1 million was the original saving that we said we were going to make, and then I think it changed a little bit and it's gone down to 728,000. To me, whether it's £1 million or 728,000 or 500,000, it's a substantial amount of money, but I don't see anywhere where it's sort of tabulated and broken down into how are we actually going to save this money, and how can we hold the decision making accountable to this money, and how do we know that it's going to be saved and over what period of time? It just seems to be sort of I'm sure it's not plucked out of the air, but it seems to be a little bit that we've just gone £1 million is a nice round number. £728,000 sounds a bit more realistic. There we go. If someone could point me to a spreadsheet which could explain exactly how this number is broken down, I would be a lot more comfortable with the decisions that we're making. Anyway, apologies for overrunning a bit there. I'm sure you're eager to answer. Thank you.
Well, no, not that, sadly not that eager, but I think it's, I'm afraid I don't have all of the details you require, but however, before I let Robert come in, who knows a lot more about this than I do, I think the original recycling and waste strategy was primarily based around staff savings, and so there were some changes to the way stuff was collected and things like that under the new strategy. So that was primarily where the gross saving came from. Once capital financing costs were taken into account from the cost of the bins, obviously moving to wheel bins, then the net saving came down. So that's how it dropped from, it was actually 1.091 million. So it wasn't a suspicious round figure at all. So it came down by 363,000, I think it was, to 728. So that's about the extent of my knowledge off the top of my head, I'm afraid. I don't know if you want to add to that, Robert.
No, I cannot add to that. That was Rose's department. That's well above my remit, I'm afraid.
Okay, we've got someone to the rescue here, Lucy Redmond.
Oh, well, here we go. Maybe not completely to the rescue, but I'll throw in my what I know. So it was I think there was a reduction of 34 staff in total, so that's 22% down. So that would be the majority of the savings. Obviously, there was some fuel savings, so there was an element of fleet included in that, but it was a revenue element of fleet. This is covering the capital side of fleet, this paper, so that's different. But there definitely was in that other paper, because I went over it again tonight, just in case it came up, which it has, there definitely was a bit of a breakdown there. So, you know, if you need more than that, we can go away and have another look at it. In terms of the, you know, the savings in the first place, is it empirically accurate? Invariably, these things are, to some degree, a bit of a guesstimate. You have to do that, don't you? I mean, we knew we had to reduce our budgets by around 25%. That's what we were looking at across services. And then we send the services away to see if that's possible. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And then we have to look in other places to see if we can make savings elsewhere if we can't make it. So you're right, we have to start with a figure. We give the challenge to the services. They go away and they see if they can find those. If not, we have to spread that around. So it's not quite plucked out of the air, of thin air. We're told by our finance colleagues how much we have to save over the period, and that's what we challenge our services to find. And then the politicians make decisions about what they want to go with.
Okay, thank you for that. Other members, any questions? Councillor Willits.
Yes, Chairman, can I just... I don't think I'm playing the game this evening. Clearly, I'm not on side, Chairman, because I truly believe we made a climate emergency declaration which impacts on this particular page. And I truly believe the Prime Minister has got his teeth into the 2030 date. Is it possible, you say that there has been a study in the provision of I think in your paper you say you would need another 500 kilowatt headroom for a really well-designed smart charging system if you go down the road of electric vehicles, if that's forced upon us as of 2030. And if you don't use a smart version, if you just allow anyone to turn up and charge their vehicle whenever the team think that it needs a bit of a top-up, you'd actually need a megawatt or 900 kilowatts of additional power. You mentioned the price, which is 400k for the substation, but is there a guarantee that that would be delivered before the year 2030, knowing the problems that some other industrialists are having in Colchester in getting additional power. So is there any hope or any guarantee of getting a substation delivered if it turns out that is the strategy which we need to take because of the external constraints and the internal constraint of our own climate emergency declaration of not having emissions from tailpipes beyond 2030?
Lucy Bredman has indicated.
So I think the first thing I'd say on this one is that we don't actually know at this stage whether EV would be the route we'd be going down. So technology, we've all said, is changing really swiftly in this area. So actually to go and spend 400,000 now on something we're not sure, A, whether there will be something different that comes along in this space that will be better. I believe, Rob, you've already tested an EV, one of the big ones. It wasn't suitable. That would have had an impact on our service provision. So we have to balance, you know, the service, what's expected by our customers and what we can deliver, and the cost, you know, undoubtedly the cost. There's always things as well like new burdens. So again, if the government do impose changes on councils, they will often, that will come along with funding to help us. I think, you know, the other key thing to say is that we are using EV vehicles now where it's suitable to use them. So the smaller vehicles have switched already to EV. So again, I think what we've tried to do here is put a framework in place to give us some financial information for the future that we haven't had in this way in the past, which is really useful and helpful. But you're right, it's not answering all the questions, and as we need to replace fleet, we will start looking at what's available, what can we deliver, that balance around the need to deliver the services and the cost of that, and whether there's new burdens coming down the line from the government if they're imposing changes on us. And presumably, again, things like the network that we would need to charge these enormous vehicles, that will be a national problem for councils. So again, there would have to be a national solution to that, and a deal probably done with UK Power Networks if that was going to be imposed on councils over a period of time. So while I understand the question, I think it's not possible for us to answer that at this stage. What we're trying to do is give ourselves a framework which gives us some clarity in our financial forecast going forward.
Thank you. I am conscious we need to wrap for a break, and we are probably almost at the end of this item. Does anyone else wish to come in? Okay. Well, thank you for your attendance, gentlemen. If I may suggest, but I will look at members, because you've had some noisier members over here, but I want to make sure we've got consensus if we can. I think Scrutiny can make a recommendation that we support this strategy. I think we can, but I think we need to also put a marker down that we expect Cabinet, and by virtue of Cabinet I obviously mean the portfolio holder, but Cabinet need to be very alive to life beyond 2030, because even if it isn't certain, and how we finance this, we don't know. At the moment, as Councillor Willits says, and Mrs Bredman has just backed up, you know, this council has said 2030 is our date. So if we are going to go against that approach, we need to be alive to the advances in technology that may well be coming. Sorry, I waffled a bit there. I think what I'm trying to say is that Scrutiny is minded to accept this and complement the report tonight, but we want Cabinet to be alive to life beyond 2030 and the implications that might make. Is that fair, Councillor Rowe?
I would like to make one additional point to that I think they also need to be alive to any potential savings that they believe they're going to make with regards to this, and I would like them to track and report on those savings at some point, to just say that the proposed 728,000 that they thought they were going to save, and I'm sure it will be done through the Fit for the Future progress. However, I would like to see that happens, because I'm not 100% convinced that will happen, but I hope very sincerely that I am corrected on that.
Okay. I think that's fair. I think that's fair to be open and transparent about everything. I don't see any dissent, so the clerk and I will just check on the words, maybe if not now, certainly later, but I mean, the clerk might well be there now. Did you get the sentiment of what I was saying?
I think so, Chairman. I'll give you what I've got in an untidied version, which I will tidy up if the panel's happy with it. Recommendation to Cabinet that the Scrutiny Panel supports the strategy, but expects Cabinet to be aware of the outlook for after 2030, given the climate emergency declaration, thank you, Chairman, deadline set at 2030, and the implications of new technology and potential savings, which should be tracked and reported back.
Okay, we have consensus, I believe. At least no one's saying no. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Just to your answer, Councillor Willis, if I will, this plan will run alongside the fleet strategy, in which I was a big part of developing. And within that fleet strategy, we mentioned that when we come to procure vehicles, we will look at all the alternatives, whether it be fuel alternatives. We'll take into consideration costs and what's operationally viable at the time. But what also what's within our gift is to determine whether we will outright purchase or we will look to contract hire. And should the terms be favourable from a contract hire perspective, we can set those terms of how long that contract agreement may be. So we could look, if Cabinet wishes to look at that from 25 to 2030, to then look at upgrading the fleet again then. So just to try and put your mind at is that these things will be looked at.
Very impressive. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, let's have a 15-minute break. Can I see you back here, please, at 1.5 minutes past 8? Thank you very much. Okay, colleagues, we'll just wait. I hope you're all refreshed. Thank you very much for your patience, folks at home. We are back for part 2 of your evening's entertainment. So, introducing this item, which was an item which was raised and requested by the Deputy Chairman in looking at the response to the climate emergency. The portfolio holder is here, so Councillor Andrea Luxford-Fawn, would you like to top this one at all, or just immediately hand over to your officer? It's entirely up to you.
I'm going to hand over to my much more capable officer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Simon. Welcome to the party.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you very much. So I'd like to begin with to say that this report aims to review the actions and progress in responding to the climate emergency and the future approach. So, Owen, if you could be so kind as to bring up my slides. I will try and...
Would it be helpful if we let you get through your presentation, or would you like interventions during?
I think it would be easy if I just went through it. I think it would save time, and I'll take questions afterwards, if that's okay.
Okay, colleagues, make a note of your questioning, and we'll make progress.
Next slide, please, Owen. So this presentation will provide a summary of the full report that was submitted to the panel. Initially, I will summarise the policy background and the rationale for declaring the original climate emergency, and I will then give a summary of some of what we have achieved over the past 5 years and look at where we are now in terms of our carbon footprint. I will then go on to provide an overview of the interventions the Council has made alongside the evaluation of potential measures before looking at some of the barriers to decarbonisation that the Council has faced and is still experiencing. I will then examine the feasibility of reducing our main emission sources and will conclude by signposting the future direction the Council should be adopting. Next slide, please. Now. So, the unanimous declaration of a climate emergency was made by the Council in July 2019 and was made in response to the recent Commission of Parties 24 conference in Poland, which had warned that we had only 12 years to make the changes required to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees centigrade, while recognising the importance of the role of local government in supporting these changes. At a national level, the UK was the first country to enshrine into law their commitment to tackle climate change through the 2008 Climate Change Act, and supported by subsequent policy measures, including the recent Energy Act in 2023 and the creation of Great British Energy earlier this year, which aims to support the transition to net zero. At a local level, the Council has responded through to the delivery of their strategic plan and climate emergency action plan, alongside coordinated development of the local plan and housing, waste fleet, waste services and estate strategies. Next slide, please. Since the declaration, the Council delivered a climate emergency action plan which saw the implementation of a wide range of sustainability projects. The plan has recently been refreshed and is now live. Responding to the climate emergency is a principal theme in the 20 to 23 and the 23 to 2026 strategic plans, and the climate change agenda has informed and incorporated into the development of key strategies. The Council has also embedded the principles of sustainability throughout the organisation by ensuring that all Council decisions consider the environmental and sustainability implications of all decision making. Furthermore, the Council has been exploring the potential of a number of projects. For instance, the Council has been developing a heat network of the Northern Gateway and are also working with the University of Essex and Essex County Council to explore the potential of a second heat network anchored at the university. These projects could help to provide low carbon and cost-effective heating solutions to commercial and residential interests. And finally, the Council has also introduced a range of measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including the electrification of heating and hot water provision at Rowan House, smart motors, pool covers, and an innovative water filtration system at Leisure World. So, where has that got us? Well, Next slide, please. The measures have helped to reduce our operational emissions and build on the work that the Council has been doing since 2008. The chart here shows that we have practically halved our emissions since then, and we've also carried out our first baseline assessment in 2008. However, since declaring a climate emergency, we have only achieved a 13.8% reduction since that time. And it is clear that if we remain on the current trajectory, we will not meet the 2030 target. Next slide, please. The Council has explored the feasibility and associated costs of decarbonising their operations, and more detail of this is provided in the main report. Decarbonisation plans were prepared by Ingleton Wood for Leisure World, the Castle, the Town Hall and all of our museums. And these plans identified that an investment of circa £15 million retrofit programme could help to reduce carbon emissions from these buildings, which would reduce the overall carbon emissions by 14%. However, this would incur an operating cost of almost £400,000 a year extra. The extremely high capital retrofit costs for historic buildings, with increased operational costs due to the inefficiencies of heating historic buildings with air source heat pumps, does not represent value for money, and certain interventions such as LED lighting replacement have been recommended to take forward. Options have been put forward as part of the waste fleet strategy and do represent potential decarbonisation pathways which could be implemented in time to meet the 90% of the emissions reductions associated with the waste fleet by 2030. Next slide, please. There have been some significant barriers to decarbonisation. Primarily, the COVID pandemic exacerbated an already challenging financial environment for the Council. And since then, we have emerged from the pandemic and have had to rethink the way we work and the way we use our estate. The financial challenge remains, and the Council has responded through the implementation of the Fit for the Future programme, which aims to manage budget shortfalls over the next 3 years. As previously mentioned, there are also network capacity restrictions. We have been looking into potentially developing a microgrid at Northern Gateway for an 8 megawatt solar farm. However, the application to the network provider for that connection, they would only grant us a 3 megawatt connection by 2033. Furthermore, the Council has recently adopted the corporate landlord model for managing their estate and has developed an estate plan that was approved by Cabinet in March 2024. Now that the plan has been approved, the planning for future investment for existing and new assets can be carried out, and best practicable options to decarbonise the estate can then be taken forward. Next slide, please. So now just look briefly at the makeup of our carbon footprint. The Council has a good understanding of our greenhouse gas emissions and has identified the 3 largest sources as being the use of gas at 48%, the fleet at 25%, and delivered electricity at 18%. Almost half these emissions are from gas to provide the heat and hot water, and the electrification of this provision using heat pumps does represent a significant decarbon opportunity. However, the efficiency of heat pumps is dependent on the age, fabric and air tightness of the individual building, and therefore should be treated as a case-by-case basis. Furthermore, connection to potential heat networks may provide a cheaper, more efficient solution compared with the retrofitting of individual buildings. The next largest source of emissions come from the operation of our fleet vehicles, predominantly which are represented by our waste vehicles, and options have been put forward as part of the waste fleet strategy and, if adopted, could significantly reduce emissions. There are, however, significant opportunities coming our way. The incoming government have revised the target for the electricity grid to be net zero by 2025 to 2030 and are investing £3.3 billion to support the uptake of public sector and community-owned energy generation, with the expectation that they will invite local authorities and communities to come forward with projects to enable local communities to benefit from local energy production. A comprehensive assessment of the estate and a detailed evaluation of the potential pathways to decarbonisation will ensure value for money and the best possible outcome. The Council understands the role that carbon offsetting can play, but should only really consider this as part of the offsetting hierarchy, which means that offsetting can only be used once measures to avoid or reduce emissions have been fully considered. And Cliff, going to the final slide, please. So to provide a brief recap, there have been significant challenges since the declaration of the climate emergency, but despite these challenges, the Council has achieved much through the implementation of the Climate Emergency Plan, which highlights the extensive programme of work that has been accomplished and identifies further initiatives aimed at working with partners and communities to improve the environmental sustainability of the city. The Council has had to navigate a challenging economic environment over the past 5 years and is currently facing significant current and future budget challenges. The creation of Great British Energy and the National Wealth Fund may provide the Council with potential funding opportunities to support decarbonisation goals, and the impact of legislation to accelerate the development of heat networks and a national drive to support local energy generation does provide an opportunity for the Council to work with partners to encourage the development of community-based energy assets, and this could be supported through the development of a local energy plan, which would link to regional and national plans to improve our energy infrastructure. The assessment of our estate, future investment strategies, and the work to outline the needs of our estate as part of our Fit for the Future programme is currently underway. This process, however, will take time and is still in the planning phase. However, a carefully considered approach will help to ensure that the opportunities which make the most sense economically and environmentally will be adopted. The Council plans to review our targets in 12 to 18 months once legislation, funding and the estates plans are in place, providing us with a far clearer understanding of our progress and future direction. At this point, the Council will be in a much better position to develop a credible and affordable carbon reduction programme that will represent value for money, help provide energy security, and by getting greater control of energy costs and ensure that the Council leads the way in a transition to a low carbon economy. Any questions?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for that report and clearly for the enormous amount of work that's going in here. It's evidence to see. I mean, I know firsthand the good initiatives around active travel, which is a difficult subject for some people, but enabling people to cycle safely is not particularly a hard thing to expect, and it's quite commonplace in the Netherlands. Right, let's have a look at members for questions. So I see Councillor Law. We haven't heard from you yet this evening, so you have the floor first of all, and then we'll have Councillor Rowe.
Thanks very much for that report and the presentation today. I'm interested, I don't sort of discuss or say more about sort of heat networks and the possible opportunities, what sort of partnerships, whether you're exploring those at the moment, and also the sort of opportunities in terms of economic benefits, in terms of boosting the local economy, and also providing, good skilled jobs and apprenticeships for people, in terms of the infrastructure that will be required. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I welcome that question. With regards to heat networks, there was a consultation with regards to the heat network zoning, which came out as part of the 2023 Energy Act. That consultation is yet to be responded to by government. However, that should come into full secondary legislation towards the end of 2025. what that will mean, that it will is aimed to potentially accelerate the development of heat networks and provide opportunities for local authorities to either be the network owner or the developer or work in partnership with development. Now, with regards to Colchester, at a specific level, we have been developing the heat network at Northern Gateway, and we're in the process of going through potentially the procurement process to look at the energy centre for that network, and that should provide a heat network which could support commercial and residential areas at that site. There is a second site that has been identified by the UK government, which is anchored at the University of Essex, and we've just gone through the process of working with the University of Essex and Essex County Council to procure a feasibility study with support from the Heat Network Development Fund, and that should start next week and look to report in April 2025. I think there was another question you had.
I think, yeah, I was just interested in terms of that infrastructure being put into place, sort of the opportunities in terms of boosting local economy, in terms of, jobs, apprenticeships, that it's a sustainable, we want to, make sure.
I'll just finish the last about heat networks and then I'll hand over to Andrea. The final third item that was marked within the heat network mapping that the UK government took actually incorporated the city centre of Colchester, and this is one of the poignant ones because that could potentially be a heat network that could provide low carbon heat to this building and to the museums. Thank you.
I just wanted to put it in the context of the national picture, which is this is kind of one of the best kept secrets that government is looking to zone or to appoint people to create zones and then to roll out heat networks across the country. There is some resistance, and it's mostly coming from developers because it's new technology. They don't know necessarily how to put it in place, and that there's obviously a massive capital investment which says you've got to dig up everything and lay your roots to all the houses to supply the energy that you're producing, whether that's to begin with, it'll be via fossil fuels, but later on by hopefully green energy. So that the jobs that will support that infrastructure will probably come through the private sector, mostly because we just won't have the capital to do things. We don't know for sure, but what we expect is that we will be part of the zoning body that will say this zone here will incorporate that area, and then we'll hand it over to industry. I think what sort of saddens me a bit is that I think though they are great plans, the reality is different, that if the investment is coming from the private sector and they don't think it's worth their money, whether or not it'll actually take off. But the kind of interesting part of it is once a zone has been created and there's a network, you have no choice but to buy your power from that person. So that's the carrot, as it were, that basically whoever's owning that network will basically be able to control the price of energy. And so actually it was quite a complicated consultation, and I think it left us with possibly more questions than it answered. So there's a long way to go on it, but just to put that point is, I think, to roll this out, we've been quite brave really with the network at Northern Gateway, and obviously the university are big players and they own a lot of land, and the interest mostly for us is that we could then transport that energy to Grinstead and be able to reduce the bills and make the affordable housing possibly affordable in terms of fuel as well. But the reality is that investment is never going to come from this council unless the government has a very, very major difference of opinion, when I assume that they won't have the capital to do that either, which is why they're going to the private sector. I just wanted to put it all in context.
Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. On the point of heat networks, I was under the impression that the council shut the heat network process and company through, I don't know, it was through Amphora or someone, down just recently, and it cost us a substantial amount of money that sort of showed up on the budget that ultimately it produced no power, and we'd invested a fair chunk into it, and we effectively got nothing back from it. I understand and take the point from Councillor Luxford-Vaughan that this is a very exciting and excellent, and I believe that they use it in places like Iceland and sort of areas like that, places effectively where the heat from the geothermal heat, I think is what it is much closer to the surface. In the UK, you have to go down quite far in order to get it, and I believe there are some engineering issues. I mean, if I'm hoping that these have been solved and that we know how these are going to work out. I was just very surprised to hear that. First of all, I'm sure that I've heard somewhere that we've shut this network down and that it costs a substantial amount of money. And now that we're looking at another one, after the first one hasn't produced anything, and then something I picked up that Councillor Luxford-Vaughan said around it initially, the heat network initially being powered by fossil fuels.
They can be powered by anything. The point is that it's a network that you then send the supply out. So houses don't have to worry about a gas boiler or electric blankets or whatever they're going to do. They get their power from the network. And just being realistic, what they're saying is initially some of them may be powered by fossil fuels, but the point is that will change over time, and
as long as the technology exists.
Yeah, that facility should be able to translate whatever the power is.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, okay, fine. So if those couple of points could be addressed and answered, that would be great. And just then, secondly, or thirdly, however you want to look at it, if it is powered by fossil fuels, I mean, what's the advantage of it being done centrally and then sort of it's sent out? I mean, how much energy does this save if you do it through fossil fuels or whatever it is? Do we know what the particular saving is for the end consumer? That would be nice to. Thank you.
I think, yeah, if I could just sort of clarify a few points, because there appears to be some confusion. So the heat network at the Northern Gateway was never operational. We got to the point that we've sunk 5 boreholes for that site, and because of basically, I imagine it was before my time, but because of the pandemic, the commercial basis for the development of that heat network was not fully realised. However, things have changed and things have moved on. The original plan for the scope for that heat network would be, it would go down into a chalk aquifer at 70 metres, and it'll be a water source heat pump. The backup for that would be 10% gas CHP. That is still part of the design programme. However, it can then potentially be looked to go to a 5th generation heat network, which could look at providing heating and cooling as well. So it is not a zero carbon technology, but a low carbon technology, if that clarifies the point.
It does. Was I correct in saying that the original, we did shut part of the heat network down, and it did cost us a substantial amount of money, am I correct? Well, fine, it cost the taxpayer.
I think it cost, well, we've got too many lights on.
I'm unaware of that. I think it might have been before my time, but I was certainly not aware that there was ever an operational heat network at Northern Gateway.
I was under the impression the cost was to put a company into dormancy, as opposed to some bloke with a spanner turning the switch at the network.
Yeah, but it was like 3.7 million or something. It was quite substantial, right?
I'm not going to even question you on the figures. I don't know them. But
okay, fair enough. Right, cool.
It was. I mean, the other point is that the houses haven't been built that we anticipated to be built. Therefore, we haven't got a customer to sell to. So that's one of the problems. And obviously, you alluded to COVID, but if we've got no one to sell it to, there's no point in producing the energy.
Yeah, no, understood. It's just, so, but as far as we're concerned, the concept makes sense still. And the concept of drilling down into the chalk that I think you said, that still makes sense. That's, if theoretically, as Councillor Lotsvaughan said, if we had houses and customers to sell it to, that would still work, or that has been debunked, or what's the point of, where are we on that?
No, heat networks are very old technology, and it should work absolutely fine.
Councillor Scordis.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just looking at the graph of how we're doing, it's obviously quite disconcerting. We've kind of plateaued. You can see where we dipped when we were in pandemic and buildings were closed, and then obviously a rise once people went back to work. Do we estimate to see a bigger drop-off now we've had this investment in not just Rowan House, but Leisure World and others that we've listed there? And have we possibly been too ambitious for what we can do as a council? Because we do have financial constraints. We are the second tier authority when it comes to local government. So be interested to hear thoughts on that.
And also, just to build on that, if I may, we are also the custodians of a considerable amount of old buildings, which many other local authorities don't have actually. And we take pride in looking after our old buildings. But the Normans didn't build the castle with much consideration for carbon emissions.
I think to add to that, Chair, is you only look around this room and firstly, do we need the lights on in that room? How many lights are we using here? There's a lot of light bulbs in there. There's questions about even this room that actually, do we need to prioritise certain things over the heritage and it looking nice? Because yeah, we're probably using a lot of energy we don't actually need to.
I remember the days when we had 100-watt light bulbs in our homes, and I've now got 5-watt bulbs everywhere. I replaced some of them myself personally, and I'm still staggered at the price of my electricity bill. Something's not working. But anyway, the question was around our targets being too ambitious, unrealistic, given the context.
I think that's going to be a question I'm going to struggle to answer. I wouldn't say the ambition of the target is necessarily difficult. However, the level of investment required to meet that ambition is going to be the problem. And without that potential external funding, I can see that something that the council will really struggle with, especially seeing, sort of having to implement the Fit for the Future programme. However, I think it's a bit of a misconception that the adoption of renewable technology should represent a net cost, and actually through the development of local energy generation and gaining a greater control of the energy that we produce, we could potentially see a cost neutral or even cost savings through that development. However, whether we can actually marry that in the same time frame as the target is going to be difficult. And going back to the heat networks, the opportunity that a heat network could offer to this building, for instance, you could potentially significantly reduce the emissions of this building. You could potentially do it to the castle as well. But that's not going to happen in 5 years' time. Even if with a strong wind behind us, when we got a go ahead in next year, once the zoning regulations have come through, that project is going to probably take at least 8 years to come to fruition. I'm not sure if there was more to unpack there.
So it was, are we expecting a kind of drop in our emissions because of that investment we've put into Rowan House, Leisure World, so forth? Are we expecting that moving forward? Because obviously that does take time.
So with regards to Leisure World, that's going to be, we've put in some very limited interventions into Leisure World over the last year. because we're going through an options appraisal for that site as part of the Fit for the Future programme and the estate strategy. So once again, it's going back to this point is we need some time to actually properly evaluate and think about what's the best way that we can push and drive that investment to achieve, you know, the sort of the maximum efficiency and the maximum returns. So at the moment, I think it's going to be negligible with regards to the reductions that the work at Rowan House and that Leisure World will achieve on the projection that I've made within that chart.
Councillor Loxford-Vaughan.
Yeah, just the interventions we've used at Leisure World have been funded by external grants. And they're sensible things to do, and there has been quite a bit of scrutiny, maybe only between us two, but you know, if you put a smart meter in as opposed to the ones we've got, for instance, what's the lifespan of that smart meter, what is the savings, it's kind of irrelevant because somebody else is paying for it, but that sort of level of scrutiny has happened. But some of our aspirations and our future plans are going to revolve about political decisions outside of this particular subject. So we were here the other night talking about our assets. You know, if you want to sell this place tomorrow morning, we have a load of capital, we could go and invest in something else. Leisure World is running out of its sort of, you know, natural lifespan. What do we do next? That's not just about the climate emergency, that's about how we address sport and leisure. So the trouble is there's too many interweaving things. You know, when we were first given this brief, I said to Simon, you've got an open checkbook, what do you want to do? And he was really sensible and said, well, that's not going to happen, so maybe we should frame this in a different way. You know, if you want to give us an open checkbook, we can make anything happen. But I just think that, you know, we have to consider other factors as well.
And if I could just interject there as well, that the open checkbook analogy is quite useful, because I think it would be very easy if you had an open checkbook to rush into some decision making, which in a few years' time might be shown to be the wrong decisions, because we need to have a really strong and clear evidence-based approach to the way we invest the money, be it our money, be it money we borrowed, or money that we've taken from general taxation.
Can I be cheeky and just drill into Leisure World a little bit, because I think it's something that does resonate with a lot of people. You know, I had a vision of Ed Miliband asking for the keys in 2030, which is a terrifying image. Children of this city need to be able to learn to swim. We know that building is coming to the end of its life, and that there is going to have to be a decision made there. Is there anything that was, and forgive me for not having read that specific report around the retrofit work, but was there anything there that could be done to get that carbon level down? I mean, for example, I've popped into the Labour group room in this building occasionally, and it's blooming warm in there because of all of the server and technology, and I just wonder if there's anything creative around using heat where you don't want it to heat things where you do want it.
You can hate the answer, I think. So, Leisure World is really, really complicated with regards to how it is heated and the operational cost of it. One of the key problems with Leisure World, though it is not really a problem, is the fact that we have a combined heat and power system at Leisure World. Now, what that does is that it uses gas to generate local electricity. And to give you an idea, the price we pay for the local electricity that's driven by the CHP at Leisure World is 7.5 pence a kilowatt hour. The electricity we pay that comes imported into Leisure World is 28 pence a kilowatt hour. So we have built a kind of addiction to the cheap electricity that we produce on site through a fossil fuel powered CHP. So this needs to be considered when we do an option appraisal, how we move forward on that building. What I've focused on in some of the interventions that I've led over the past year is to look at things that have achieved a very, very high and sharp payback. So anything that's been able to pay back the capital, whether it's been ours or the money that's been provided from Sport England, but it's done that in less than 18 months.
Members, I've got loads of questions, but I think Councillor Willits had his hand up.
Chairman, I sit here perplexed this evening. I thought that the council had, as I said, I'm repeating what I said in the earlier item, I thought we had climate emergency. And this was our decision. It wasn't nothing to do with national politics. It was our decision that the council would be carbon neutral by 2030. And what I've been hearing all evening is that that is really not so at all. It was good to have a resolution. You always feel great when you voted unanimously on that sort of thing. But it would appear that that resolution is being willingly ignored because it isn't necessarily supportive of the council's budget and even the projects that are underway at the moment. And I looked up the definition of an emergency earlier on. It said the UN definition, an emergency is urgent, unexpected and usually dangerous situation that poses immediate risk to health, life, property, environment, and requires immediate action. Well, I don't think what we're talking about this evening is an emergency at all. I think we were just carried away, and it may have been okay at the time, but perhaps we need to reconsider whether we're talking about emergencies or whether we're talking about sensible management action. And it's quite clear to me that we've had a large programme, and it's documented here, of things which have been done as and when budget is available, which are carefully costed, their benefits looked at, and only those which are of significant value to the council and the taxpayer have been proceeded with. And this really is the sensible way of dealing with this problem, not having an emergency. And I suppose one can think of three strategies, and whenever I'm thinking of options, I always think of three. One is business as usual, which we have at the moment, managing opportunities to reduce carbon emissions as and when they present themselves within budget in a sensible way. And that is typified by the work which Simon has presented to us this evening, Chairman. If we really had a climate emergency, we would have an accelerated programme, and we'd be doing all sorts of large projects. The Leisure World project has been mentioned. We've already discussed the fleet vehicle, plus lots of others, which obviously need a lot of thought, careful attention, careful costing, looking at options. Sometimes we need to defer because technology is around the corner and we're not sure whether it is trustable. And so do we really want a climate emergency in this council, or do we want sort of sensible management? And the third strategy was that Cabinet buys a load of super glue and glues itself down to the high street and refuses to do anything until there's a root and branch change in the way the city is wrecking the planet. Of those strategies, I think we are already adopting the business as usual, careful, considered measures, and that is really what we should continue doing. And I would think, Chairman, that it would be wise to go back with this honest approach to Council and say, at 2019, it seemed a good idea to have a climate emergency and to fix 2030 as a stake in the ground which we could not miss under any circumstances. And we should be saying our current approach is perhaps taking the more considered approach to what we do, how much it costs, and what the benefits are, and what technology we're going to use. And it may be disappointing for the Scrutiny Panel to suggest that to Cabinet, because I'm sure there are one or two activists who really believe we should have the super glue out. But I think for most of us, we've been convinced by two presentations this evening that setting a target of 2030 is perhaps not the best way for the Council to proceed. And I believe in tidy management, Chairman, and it is wrong, therefore, to have the climate emergency resolution on the books of the council as a policy that we all buy into if, from a practical sense of getting the work of the council done, that is no longer going to be our objective. So I certainly welcome what is being done. I think as a scrutiny panel, we should be thanking the office for this long list of small but significant carbon management projects, which taken together are certainly having an impact. Perhaps not the impact that we would get in a true emergency when we would say to Simon, here's the £15 million that you were talking about, you know, go away and do the castle and do everything else. The measured approach. So I would see that the panel should be welcoming the work that's being done, the speed and thoroughness with which it's being done, the careful consideration of what we invest taxpayers' money in, and that we should really reflect that in the council's overall objective of having a business as usual climate change policy rather than an emergency, because I don't believe we've got an emergency. I don't believe we want one either.
Okay, there's a lot there. Thank you, Councillor Willits. While we're gathering our thoughts about how we may wish to respond to that, and by all means, if any other councillors wish to respond to what Councillor Willits has just said, I'm just going to fill some time and reiterate that I think, you know, we all want in this room there to be clean air. We all want clean water, and we all want to be able to have people, and including ourselves, the ability to cycle safely. We all want to celebrate the beautiful landscape and countryside that we live in. I find the word solar farm a slight oxymoron. It's not a farm, and I'm not convinced about where the solar equipment is made, how it's made, and the impact on the environment, etc. But I'll leave that. Simon, there was a lot there. Do you want to respond to what Councillor Willits has said? Because he's basically, I think, saying this seems unrealistic and we need to probably help you out by saying thank you for what you're doing, keep doing it, but don't break your back in doing something or setting a target that's not realistic. That was what I got from Councillor Willits.
Yeah, I don't think it was the target I'd actually set, but it's, you know, I understand there is a climate emergency. It's you know, we declared one. However, there could be other ways that we could potentially look at it. We could look at realigning our targets with national and international targets, which we haven't done because ours is, you know, we've got a lot of other local authorities have got 2030 targets, 2035 targets. So that's something that could potentially be looked into. But it's that pragmatic approach which I think is really important, while recognising there is a climate emergency and we need to do something about it. Because what the report doesn't do, and what I'm starting to look at, is what are going to be the costs of not doing anything? What will be the costs of dealing with the impacts of the climate emergency while continuing to invest in the mitigations?
Councillor Rowe.
Chair, sorry, apologies, slightly off topic, but wholeheartedly relevant. Was there a submission by Councillor Dundas that needed to be read out?
There was, so just for transparency, I've deliberately held that back because I didn't want someone not in the room to have an impact on the discourse so early on. So I've held back on it, and I was going to have it before the end. We might be getting to that point though, but thank you. Other members, do you have any questioning or any thoughts? I mean, Councillor Willits has sort of come up with quite a solid recommendation. I can surmise what I think he's getting at. I don't know if you support the sentiments, and if we can try and find a way through here to help Cabinet and to help councillors out. Councillor Scottis.
So when this was called, I mean, I think we overestimated how big an impact we could have as a council. When it comes to climate initiatives, Essex County Council has most of the power there around roads, public transport, that it can actually have an effect. And obviously Colchester in itself can only do so much, but it's important we do our part. I think Simon raises a point. If we don't take action now on simple things such as upgrading some of our buildings, Rowan House is actually still relatively a modern building that will be there for many, many years. Even if devolution happens, it might get sold off, I don't know. But we need to make sure that it's up to the standards. Similar with buildings like this, we need to make sure, again, it's fit for the modern age, and any other assets we do have, and even Leisure World, while we decide the future of that, we need to do our best, because we know that became an issue during the energy crisis around heating the pool. So I think we have to be realistic about what we can do as a council. It is limited to what we own, so we can't enforce cycle lanes and all these other things, or more bus lanes. That's not within our power. What is mainly within our power is our housing stock, council homes, and we've been ahead of the curve on that because they've had solar panels for years. And I remember friends from London coming down couldn't believe we had solar panels on our own council stock. And the other assets that we own, such as Town Hall, Rowan House, Leisure World, and many others that we do own. So I just think we have to be realistic about what we can do. We're not going to save the world on our own, but I think we're doing our bit, and there's also an economic argument to doing what we're doing as well.
I'm seeing a lot of nods in the room, and thank you for that, Councillor Scorless. And I just wonder if the room will nod with me on this one. So I think what you're saying there, for example, where we have housing stock that it requires, for example, replacement windows, we replace them as per the estate management schedule. And if that means beyond 2030, that's what we do, because if we were to do it to hit the arbitrary 2030, in which we also lost 2 years of our lives to COVID if we aim for 2030, then we're going to be bankrupting ourselves in doing it. And it's not...
Yeah, I mean, without, again, that external financing, which Simon's highlighted, and we'll see if that comes in, because the government before and the government currently have some pretty strict measures on housing and energy efficiency. So we will see, for example, what happens. But yeah, no, you're completely right. We can't, as you say, there isn't an open checkbook where we can just go, brilliant, we'll do this in the next 5 years. Some of it we just have to be realistic. And it will be down to council officers looking at bids on all their certain areas.
Councillor Rowe, and then I might see Councillor McCarthy. Councillor McCarthy first, because I think I saw you get lively over it.
It's just a really quick one. So I was coming along anyway as chair of the Environment and Sustainability Panel, and I wanted to kind of get an understanding what the Scrutiny Panel thought of the climate emergency so far, as it were, and the work that we've been doing prior to me becoming chair. I'm with you, Councillor Willits, and I think it is very much a climate business as usual. If you look at the Environmental and Sustainability Panel, we've gone from 6 meetings down to 3. That's how little work we're actually doing. So it was more just to add that in. It's a case of, I was wondering if there were recommendations that would come from the panel tonight that actually make us have to do more. Maybe we look at increasing the number of meetings we have as a panel for next municipal year. But it sounds like the conversation is kind of leaning towards the fact that it is very much as it is now. That was what I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to the point around funding and looking to external areas for funding. I mean, last time I checked, Colchester City Council has the ability to raise its own funds through taxation. Now, not being one myself to particularly think that the government any level of government should increase taxes. However, if this council so believes there is an emergency, they do have the ability to raise taxes and raise funds to go with that. And if they genuinely believe that there is merit to doing so, then they should put that to the people of Colchester and request that they be given more funds, rather than consistently and always looking to outside bodies, be it the government or Essex County Council or whoever. We're always sort of, passing the buck and saying it should be someone else that funds it. Well, I'd say look at home before you look elsewhere.
It's a mechanic could be used. Councillor Luxon-Vaughan.
I was just going to say on the raising the council tax, obviously there's a cap which we would have to go to a referendum. If that's a recommendation, that's fine, but there is a cost to doing a referendum as well. So if that's a consideration or a recommendation you want to make, just bear that in mind. I can also probably predict, although people say climate emergency is nearly top of their list, when it actually comes out of their pocket, they probably will.
Agreed, which is why it's always somebody else will fund it. So,
And Councillor
how
Rowe,
much of an emergency
much
really
like
is.
HMRC will accept checks from anyone that wishes to pay more tax, maybe the City of Colchester could receive some public donations for anyone that would like to help us out in this area. I am going to get to the end of this item, but I've seen the leader raise his hand. Just before he does, because he might have the final word on this one, we did have a statement submitted in good time by the leader of the opposition in this place earlier on. I deliberately held it back because I wanted to see the room without the leader of the opposition in this place having his say. But we will now turn to that because it's quite interesting in that it might be on the same page as what we've experienced this evening in the conversations. And we're going to hand over now to the clerk who will eloquently read that statement.
I fear you're making promises that my voice can't cash. But anyway, we'll give this a go. Statement from Councillor Dundas. The report which members have before them is, on the whole, a refreshingly honest one. It states that the declaration made in 2019 was an ambitious one, and that is proving to be the case. Whilst much progress has been made, there is a strong reality bites element running through the report. There may well be a discussion this evening about the merits or the necessity of these actions. We, as councillors, have to accept there are differing views out there and respect them all. We have to listen to those who perhaps dispute the established acceptance of the nature of climate change and the reasons for it. Even if we may not agree with them, we should always listen. However, regardless of any individual's views on climate change, surely we can all agree that, on the whole, chucking pollution into our environment, if it can practically be avoided, is a bad thing. It has been accepted as a bad thing in the UK since the Clean Air Act of 1953. Striving to improve our environment and the quality of where we live is not a new thing which has suddenly become fashionable in the last 20 years, but a long-standing aim. The truth is, what Colchester does or doesn't do in the world context makes no difference. The UK makes up a small amount of world pollution, and Colchester makes up a small amount of UK pollution. However, if every small council and small country just said it's somebody else's problem, the cumulative effect would be little gets done at all. To coin a phrase, every little bit helps. The feeling that it was right Colchester did its bit and simultaneously strived to improve the environment for our citizens living in on our doorstep was, I think, the primary motivation for councillors voting the way they did in 2019, and I suspect that view still prevails. The key point, though, is practical. There is much low-hanging fruit which has been and can be tackled. The question is to what extent we should spend millions of pounds of money and affect the services residents receive to get that last 2, 3 or 5% or whatever. If the council misses its 2030 target by 5%, it really makes no difference to Colchester or the world. Getting that last few percent has to have a cost-benefit analysis. We also have to be practical about how technology changes. Some comes forward and develops faster than expected. Some lags more than expected. We have to adapt our plans regularly depending on that and not be dogmatic. For example, although great progress has been made, development of batteries for vehicles has not quite made the progress on cost and weights predicted 10 years ago. The Council's progress on emissions also depends massively on the electricity supply mix. In other words, a considerable amount of our CO2 reduction progress is actually completely out of our hands. Will we really decarbonise the grid by 2030? Maybe, but no one has really explained how we will do that, so it remains to be seen. Finally, there is talk in the report about GB Energy. I will leave out the politics on this, but this is not the first time a government tried to encourage local authorities to get involved in energy. We received a grant from the last government to do that. On the whole, this has not been a happy experience for most. Colchester's involvement was not successful and resulted in lots of money spent, lots of time taken, and not one watt generated. Other councils have bankrupted themselves by getting involved in larger schemes. We should be deeply cautious about any future involvement. So if the committee makes a recommendation, I would suggest, firstly, it includes a huge caveat of practicality in what we do, and that getting the last few percentage of our target must have a proper cost-benefit analysis. Secondly, we have to adapt as anticipated technology timelines accelerate or lag. Thirdly, our progress is hugely dependent on factors outside of our control, namely decarbonisation or otherwise of the electricity supply. And fourthly, we should be deeply cautious of any involvement in future energy generation schemes. Statement ends.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Clark, and you deserve a pint of Colchester beer for taking the trouble to read all of that. And I think Councillor Dundas is waiting at the bar of the Three Wise Monkeys for you as we speak. But on a serious note, that was a very interesting set of words. I'm going to bring the leader to have the last say, and then I'm going to try and encapsulate where I think we're at. But I will obviously take challenge on that. But leader, Mr. McCarthy, you have been an excellent substitute. Thank you for your time this evening. May you have a safe and sustainable journey home.
Thank you.
Okay. We have invited the leader to the table. I'm just aware that Councillor McCarthy is departing and Councillor Scordis is temporarily vacated. Hopefully he'll return. He'll miss out. But leader, you have the floor.
It's always worrying when people leave a room, isn't it? I thought I don't want to cut across what needs to be your conclusions, but I'll try and contribute when I think it's perhaps a little helpful in framing. I could have said, many of us could, what was well said by Councillor Dundas just now. I think we're at a moment where it's right, and the paper, thank you, Simon, Andrea, absolutely captures that sense of a crossroad, long multiple crossroads, when we're at points of change of technology, where we're a few years down the line, recognising what we can do and what we can't do. And a number of speakers have said something similar, which is today we would recognise that in practical terms we are only a small part of the whole, but it's important that we play the fullest sensible part that we can, recognising the choices we have. And I just want to play back to you, that feels right to me. But I'd like you to just think about the words that were given by Simon. And the report itself, which I think is 4.6.9, says that there are a number of really important factors for this council. If we're focusing on what we can do and the example we can set, then we need to understand that there's some really important work around assets and the future of what we have, hold, and how we treat it. And I think that's where you might choose to direct your remarks, Chair, on behalf of the panel. In that 12 or 18 months window, we will have the opportunity to do some deeper work. We will have some more guidance and direction coming down from government post COP29, and to be frank, as the new government finds its feet, all of which is, I think we understand, would be fair. If we also did the one extra thing that Simon's mentioned to us, then we'll have something that still has a sense of emergency and a sense of importance, doesn't water down or walk away from 2019, but resets ourselves practically, which is to acknowledge that the views of the world around us have changed in terms of what's possible, by when, what dates are best used as targets. And I would just suggest that we play back to Cabinet that you're in accord with that general direction and you're reinforcing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Okay, I'm going to have an attempt at this, and then we have a conversation. But I feel that the putting the pressure on ourselves to retrofit some of our historic assets is unrealistic. I'm a big believer in the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen. We must continuously seek to improve, and just like we are here all bound by the Nolan principles, we're also bound by EDI implications, and we should, I hope we all do, we factor that into everyday life. And so seeking to good to the environment and sustainable and having clean air, etc., 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 is absolutely where we should be at. But I wonder if this set of words might be useful as a starting point for recommendations. Scrutiny notes that the definition of the word emergency dictates that council is missing its own self-imposed objective, unless significant capital budgets are identified to assist with the carbon reduction schemes. If Cabinet is unable to achieve this, it should consider reconsulting with full council to ascertain if the will of council is to consider this an emergency, as opposed to managing opportunities to reduce carbon and improve our environment and public realm with its existing budgetary framework and business plans. I don't know if that is too wordy, but that's the thrust of it, where I think we should be at. And I invite Andrea and Simon, if you have a view. I mean, obviously we have to make a decision here.
I don't have a view because it's your gift.
No, but I would welcome your thoughts on the thrust of where we're getting at.
I think it's a very sensible proposition. I don't know in practical terms how that process works, but I'm sure someone will tell me and we can make it happen for you.
Okay.
As you say, it'll go to Cabinet to then consider it, and whether they want to then take a report into full council.
Okay, members, are you broadly happy with those words I've read? If you are, then the process would appear that they go to Cabinet as a formal recommendation. Cabinet will consider whether or not they support the words and put it to full council for a report and a subsequent conversation. I think that's where we're at. Okay, then in that case, that will be the recommendation.
Would you be able to send
I will. Yes, I will stay behind tonight and keep you from your pint of Colchester beer that Paul Dundas is buying you at the Three Wise Monkeys. But we will now move on.
So can I just get a formal?
Sure. So that was my formal recommendation. Do I see all those in favour?
I see 4 in favour.
Okay. I see all those against, and I see abstentions. Okay, thank you.
Four in favour, 2 abstentions, so the motion's carried, the recommendation's carried.
Thank you very much. I think that was very constructive. We will now move on. I'm always trying to move on too quickly, aren't I? Thank you very much, Simon, for your time this evening. And thank you for Andrea Luxford-Vaughan. That is item 11 covered. So, is it the work programme?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the only item left is the work programme, and unless I'm having a moment of memory, I don't think there's anything in there that's new, so I'm happy to put that to panel for consideration. Any questions?
Councillor Willetts.
It's the report from the monitoring officer on the alumno matter and the prospect of scrutiny either in public or private. Is that a work item at this stage, or is it just a bit of ephemeral stuff which might lead to a work item?
As the Deputy Chair says, Mr. Chairman, yes, it's technically an ephemeral item. It's not on the work programme, but we're provisionally looking to schedule that for a date in January. As far as we're going, and if we can get
that would be the confidential briefing to this panel. In anticipation of potentially it coming here, but that would depend on what is said within that confidential briefing and the timings associated with. Right. If everyone's happy, then I will close the meeting. And thank you for your time this evening. We did that in good time, considering it was a significant meeting. I wish you a safe, pleasant and sustainable journey home.
Send me the thing of the...
I'm still here. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.